Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Indian Council of World Affairs web-based seminar on India and the island states in the Indian Ocean, Evolving Geopolitics and Security Perspectives. To speak on this important theme, we have with us today eminent chairs and panelists from India and the 5 island states of the Indian Ocean. It is also my pleasure to welcome Dr. Sanjay Baru, member governing body ICWA, to deliver the keynote address. To start, now I request Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, Director General, ICWA, to give opening remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Sanjay Baru, distinguished journalist, author, and member of the ICWA Governing Council, Ambassadors Ashok Kant and Ambassador Anup Mudgul, all the distinguished guests and panelists, thank you so much for joining us today. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this web-based seminar on India and island states in the Indian Ocean, Evolving Geopolitics and Security Perspectives. In the last few years, ICWA has focused a great deal on the strategic affairs of the Indian Ocean and the wider Indo-Pacific region. We have hosted major national and international conferences as well as published books and articles dealing with maritime issues. This seminar is a part of that process and an attempt to focus on strategic perspectives from the island states of the Western Indian Ocean. In the Indian Ocean geopolitics, the concerns and issues of small island states are often not deliberated upon in detail, even though they are strategically located on sea lanes of communication and have critical importance in any discussion on maritime security and safety, on building blue economies, on enhancing maritime connectivity and building partnerships for the sustainable use of ocean resources. Experts from India and the countries that are participating in the seminar belong to the region of the Indian Ocean, where geopolitics is being shaped by traditional as well as non-traditional security issues. Also, extra-regional powers are seeking to establish a foothold in the region. Their growing presence presents a new challenge to regional security and stability. India has traditionally close and friendly ties with the island nations of the Indian Ocean and has built strong political, economic development and people-to-people ties with these countries. In the recent years, India has been vigorously enhancing its engagement with the island nations through the Sagar initiative, which is the security and growth for all in the region. As the first responder during humanitarian crisis, India extended assistance during Tsunami in 2004 and medical assistance more recently during the COVID-19 through its mission Sagar. As a resident nation, India has shared concerns about ensuring security in the region in the face of threats, whether they are from piracy or terrorism, and it understands the need for the island nations to build their defense and security infrastructure. And in this context, India has extended lines of credit for defense and has gifted military equipment such as Dornier aircraft to enhance the maritime security capacities of the island nations. We have also worked together in regional organization, whether it is the Indian Ocean Rim Association, IORA, or it is the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, INOS. For managing the strategic dynamics of the Indian Ocean, we need to strengthen these processes. In this webinar, we will attempt to understand how island nations look at the evolving geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific region. What are their key concerns? What are their perspectives about the growing military presence of extra-regional powers in the region? How do island nations look at India's role in the Indian Ocean? How do they chart their national trajectories in the face of sharpening international politics in the region? And how do their concerns about climate change, blue economy, IUU fishing, and maritime governance affect the national security strategy as they develop them? We look forward to discussions, and once again, I thank all of you for accepting our invitation to join this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I request Dr. Sanjay Baru to deliver the keynote address. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh. Thank you, Samatha. And thanks to all of you for being here virtually this morning. My own interest in the subject of the Indian Ocean goes back to the period when I was the Director for Geoeconomics at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, where we conducted several conferences on the geoeconomics rather than the geopolitics of the Indian Ocean. And therefore, my remarks today will have a greater geoeconomics content rather than purely a geopolitical content. But we meet today, this interesting time, when India has just launched a new aircraft carrier and a Chinese Navy ship came to visit Sri Lanka. With European powers, especially Britain and France, showing renewed interest in the Indian Ocean body, this body of water which has remained a zone of peace, so to speak, has begun to attract global attention. It is therefore relevant for countries within this geographical space to note that the only memory of conflict that we have in the Indian Ocean region is associated with powers that have entered this space from the outside. We have never been in conflict with each other, either the littoral states or the island states of this region. The maritime historian K.M. Panikkar noted in his classic monograph, India and the Indian Ocean, an essay on the influence of sea power on Indian history, published as long back as 1945. And I quote, "Millenniums before Columbus sailed the Atlantic and Magellan crossed the Pacific, the Indian Ocean had become an active thoroughfare of commercial and cultural traffic. Yet, much of the focus of the academic literature and policy analysis for a long time has been on maritime security, sea power and naval strategy, with little attention paid to pan-ocean economic development, investment in maritime infrastructure, maritime connectivity and commerce. Therefore, India's more recent focus on the development of a blue economy and on maritime domain awareness, even as the region comes once again under the shadow of big power rivalries, augurs well for development and security within the Indian Ocean region." Professor Panikkar did, of course, emphasize the strategic importance of the sea, and he believed that control of the Indian Ocean and of all the choke points leading in and out, including the Malacca Straits, the Gulf of Aden, and the southern expanse of the ocean near Mauritius, should be in Indian hands to safeguard India's freedom from external aggression. In his masterly study of civilization and capitalism through the 15th to 18th centuries, the historian Fernand Braudel underscored the dominant presence of India in the Indian Ocean, referring to the region spanning the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal, the Straits of Malacca, and the South China Sea, what is now called the Indo-Pacific, as the greatest of all the world economies of the pre-industrial and pre-capitalist era. The relationship between these huge areas, wrote Braudel, and I quote, was the result of a series of pendulum movements of greater or lesser strength either side of the centrally positioned Indian subcontinent. The swing might benefit first the East and then the West, redistributing functions, power, and political or economic advance. Through all these vicissitudes, however, India maintained her central position. Her merchants in Gujarat and on the Malabar and Coromandel coasts prevailed for centuries against their many competitors, the Arab traders of the Red Sea, the Persian merchants of the Gulf, or the Chinese merchants familiar with the Indonesian seas, to which their junks were now regular visitors. Unquote. Such was the geoeconomics of the Indian Ocean before the Europeans entered this space. As historian Sanjay Subramaniam notes, long before the ports of Calcutta, Madras and Bombay became India's link with the ocean, independent ship-owning merchants of India traded with the world through ports such as Surat, Machilipatnam, Hooghly and Calicut. Ashin Dasgupta summed up his enormous research on the world of the Indian Ocean merchants thus, and I again quote, "There can be little doubt that in the prosperous years of the late 17th century, a few thousands of such men set out every year to take care of India's overseas trade and connect India closely with the world of the Indian Ocean. These are men who serviced the commercial ships in every way while in the port. They brought together the export cargo on board. They arranged for the sale of imports. They made it possible for the travelers to sail by arranging to finance their voyage. They were merchants in general trade. They were merchants of particular commodities. They were the money merchants, and above all, they were all the brokers of the port towns." The Indian maritime merchant, properly so called, depended upon and assisted the service sector in the magic century which began roughly in the 1630s, and I unquote. It is the entry of European merchants and navies that ended what Professor Dasgupta called a magic century of Indian maritime activity from the middle of the 17th till the middle of the 18th centuries. European colonialism altered the nature of India's relationship with the waters around it. The waters around the Indian subcontinent were no longer a bridge to prosperity, but became a route to the deindustrialization and destruction of the Indian economy. And they made most island territories captive to imperial commerce. Mauritius, for example, was forced to become a plantation economy, importing indentured labor from India and serving the needs of European mercantilism. The flag then followed trade. Since European conquest came via the sea, much of the discourse on the sea focused excessively on security and defense, with the relative neglect of its maritime economic potential. It is useful, therefore, to recall that through this entire phase of history, when India had an Indian Ocean presence and personality, it was always viewed by the island nations in the ocean as an opportunity and never as a threat. Historically, India has never been a hegemonic power in the Indian Ocean. Indeed, it is worth asking today why the flag of some Western powers continue to fly on Indian Ocean islands. It is equally relevant to ask why countries from outside the region, most recently China, seek to establish naval bases in the Indian Ocean. In what manner are such powers likely to alter the stability and security of the environment of the Indian Ocean? Should we, the literal, let me switch off my phone. My apologies. Should we, the littoral and island nation states, not be concerned about these developments? While India today works within the cooperative frameworks with countries like the United States, France and Britain, it is not clear to me why their island territories, all colonial positions, should remain within a subordinate relationship with Western powers. Equally, why should Indian Ocean littoral and island states become tied to the security calculus of outside powers? Indeed, even less clear is what motivates the growing presence of China in the region. Has Indian Ocean security become captive once again to the strategic interests of outside powers? That was our history through the 18th, 19th and early 20th century. Are we returning to an era where the kind of freedom that we have enjoyed in the Indian Ocean region is under threat because of big power rivalry? What are we, the countries of the region, doing about it? Such questions have gone out of fashion within many post-colonial societies, but they require to be asked and answered. Post-independence India, which turned inward after independence, paid little attention to the ocean and the world economies. However, after 1991, when the government of India began to emphasize the economic dimension to India's stakes in the global economy, the Indian Ocean gained in its importance as a bridge to the rest of the world. The rise of East Asian economies, as well as the acceleration of India's own economic growth, drew attention to the need to assure the security of sea lanes of communication for the transportation of oil from West Asia to South and East Asia, and other commodities from East Asia to Europe. If oil began to move in increasing quantities across the Indian Ocean, goods too moved increasingly as Asian exports to Europe and West Asia increased with time. With the rise of Asian economies, especially the East Asian economies, the Indian Ocean regained its significance as an arena of commerce. India's economic stake in Western Indian Ocean region was also enhanced by the increasingly important economic role of the Indian community in West Asia. Inward remittances from Indians working in the Gulf region has over time become an important constituent of India's foreign exchange reserves. On the other hand, the safety of Indians living in the Gulf and their rapid repatriation home during emergencies has added a new security dimension to India's ocean strategy. It was against this background and during Prime Minister Narasimha Rao's tenure that the Indian Ocean Rim Initiative was launched, creating a new regional grouping of the littoral and island states. The Indian Ocean Rim Initiative mutated into the Indian Ocean Rim Association with a focus on sustainable development and regional economic cooperation. IORA's objectives have been to promote sustainable growth and development in the ocean region with a focus on economic liberalization and a lowering of cross-border trade and investment barriers. While IORA as an organization with headquarters in Mauritius has progressed very slowly, it has helped focus policy attention, at least in India, on issues that soon came to define India's blue economy policies. The IORA identified 6 priority areas that have come to define India's Indian Ocean blue economy strategies. These are maritime security, trade and investment facilitation, fisheries management, disaster risk reduction, academic and scientific cooperation, and tourism promotion and cultural exchange. These remain India's central concerns even today. Of the 3 major ocean littorals, the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean region is economically least developed. Apart from a handful of countries like Singapore, Australia, and the United Arab Emirates, most countries around the ocean are classified as lower or middle-income economies. The trans-ocean trade across the Indian Ocean is much less than trans-ocean trade across the Atlantic and Pacific is quite understandable. In fact, most of the Indian Ocean economies trade with countries around the Atlantic and the Pacific. The only major item traded within the Indian Ocean region is oil. Given the region's relative economic backwardness, the focus of the region's governments will have to be on their internal economic development and on establishing beneficial economic relations with the rest of the world. This basic need to remain focused on economic development should, in my judgment, define the security calculus of not just our countries individually, but of the region as a whole. Given this understanding, the focus on the development of cross-ocean connectivity, development of ports and harbors, shipbuilding and maritime capability, fisheries and mineral exploration, oceanography, and so on, should be the agenda for the region's blue economy development. The blue economy is more than a country's coastal economy. It may include activities related to fisheries, boat and ship making, ship repairing and breaking, ports and shipping, marine biotechnology, marine construction, deep sea mining, tourism, marine renewable energy, insurance, finance, and ocean disaster management. It has the potential to provide employment and livelihood to large sections of a country's population and to contribute to sustainable development. In island economies such as Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Sri Lanka, one need not overemphasize the relevance and importance of blue economy development. It is therefore understandable that India places considerable emphasis on the development of the blue economy and views this as an important bridge in its relations with the island territories of the Indian Ocean, island countries of the Indian Ocean. Outlining the centrality of the Indian Ocean to India's security and development, Prime Minister Narendra Modi told the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue at Singapore in June 2018, and I quote, "The Indian Ocean has shaped much of India's history. It now holds the key to our future. The ocean carries 90% of India's trade and our energy sources. It is also the lifeline of global commerce. The Indian Ocean connects regions of diverse cultures and different levels of peace and prosperity. It also now bears ships of major powers. Both these, the economic connectivity as well as the arrival of the ships of major powers, both raise concerns of stability and contest." Unquote. Government of India has brought India's security concerns in the Indian Ocean and the region's shared development priorities together in the formulation of what is called the Security and Growth for the region, which is SAGAR. Security and growth for all in the region. Indeed, SAGAR is a geo-economic construct that retains a balance between maritime security and economic development and cooperation so essential to the security of the Indian Ocean region. It balances the imperatives of power and security with the necessity of growth and prosperity. Consequently, any maritime strategy and doctrine for the Indian Ocean must balance the security and development interests of all countries in the region. The regional response to the tsunami in December 2004, for example, when I actually had the experience of being in government and following developments on a day-to-day basis, finally confirmed the relevance of a regional approach to both growth and security in the Indian Ocean region. All these issues have now come together in the policy thinking on what has been called maritime domain awareness. The International Maritime Organization, which defines MDA as, quote, "the effective understanding of any activity associated with the maritime environment that could impact upon the security, safety, economy, or environment of the ocean." The use of land-based, sea-based, space-based, and cyber-related technologies in improving maritime domain awareness has made the task highly technology-intensive and financially costly. Developed economies like the United States, Japan, and France have invested considerably in maritime domain awareness, including in the Indian Ocean region. And India is now collaborating with them in this field. Given the infrastructure and technology costs involved and the human capability required, small island states within the Indian Ocean region may not be able to invest adequately in securing better MDA. Therefore, the development of maritime development awareness, infrastructure and technologies could be an important agenda for cooperation between India and the Indian Ocean island states. Investment in maritime domain awareness should be viewed both from an economic and a security perspective. The ability of island states to tap their blue economy potential depends on their maritime domain awareness. Equally, the ability of such states to safeguard against security threats, especially sea-based terrorist attacks, also depends on MDA capability. The India-Japan and India-France cooperation in enhancing MDA capability in the Indo-Pacific region could benefit the island states of the Indian Ocean if shared programs can be devised with a focus on technology adaptation information sharing, and infrastructure development. The island states of the Indian Ocean are aware of both the potential for economic cooperation between India and the littoral and island states, as well as the necessity for cooperation in addressing regional security challenges. The geopolitics and the geoeconomics of the Indian Ocean region compel the littoral and the island states, as well as India, to work within a framework of regional development and regional security, conscious of the fact that in the post-Second World War period, the Indian Ocean has not been a theater of conflict, while the Atlantic and the Pacific remain so. Compare, for example, British action in the Malvinas not very long ago, the US attitude to Cuba, or China's to Taiwan. Compare these with India's relations with the island states of the Indian Ocean region. There has never been a situation of conflict or tension between India and these island and littoral states. Rather, India has sought to promote growth and security within the region. It is in India's own interest to maintain relations of mutual benefit and mutual interdependence with the island republics of the Indian Ocean region, not allowing big power rivalries to destabilize our region. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are moving on to the first technical session on Sri Lanka and Maldives. To chair the session, we have with us today Ambassador Ashok Kanta, former Indian High Commissioner to Sri Lanka. Sir, I request you to chair the session and conduct the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, Dr. Sanjay Baru, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank Indian Council of World Affairs for organizing this seminar and for inviting me to chair the session on Sri Lanka and the Maldives. We just heard very thoughtful opening remarks from Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, who underlined the importance of this conversation with 5 island nations of the Indian Ocean. And then we had a masterly keynote speech by Dr. Sanjay Baru. Let me, basically make 4 points in my introductory remarks before I invite our very formidable panelists to make their comments. First point I would like to mention is rather obvious and self-evident and also flows from what Dr. Baru had to say. And that point is that India is the largest economy and the most populous country in the Indian Ocean region. And by the virtue of its location and history, it's a geopolitical keystone of the ocean. It has a pivotal role to play in the IOR. If we look at the map of the Indian Ocean, it's obvious why this ocean is named after India, why it matters to India, and why India matters in any discourse on this ocean. Dr. Baru referred to remarks made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at Shangri-La Dialogue, which brought out the importance of Indian Ocean for India in so many different ways. Likewise, if Indian Ocean is at the crossroads of global trade, India is at the crossroad of the Indian Ocean. As Dr. Baru brought out, we had this very fine tradition of maritime activities which were interrupted due to colonial subjugation, and subsequently an inward-looking approach adopted by India post-independence. But I believe that period is behind us, as there is a re-emergence of maritime outlook in our thinking, as our maritime traditions are being restored, and as both Vijay and Sanjay brought out, we have taken initiatives like Prime Minister's vision of Sagar, or security and growth for all in the region, which was articulated in 2015 in Mauritius. And there have been several initiatives taken since then. The short point I would like to make here is that India is the center of the Indian Ocean, and we are back in terms of our presence and activities in the Indian Ocean region. Second point I would like to make is that working closely with the littoral nations and island states of the Indian Ocean is a key component of India's Indian Ocean strategy. In this context, Sri Lanka and Maldives are at the heart of India's neighborhood first and Sagar constructs. With both countries, India shares bonds which are multidimensional, cutting across civilizational, societal, economic, security, and strategic domains. India attaches the highest priority to relationship with Sri Lanka and Maldives, which also gets reflected in travels of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, both during his first term and second term. We understand that this assessment of the importance of relations, bilateral relations, is fully reciprocated by Sri Lanka and the Maldives as well. In a recent interview to The Economist, President Ranil Wickremesinghe remarked, Sri Lanka has a special relationship with India where we have to look after each other's interests. During his visit to India last month, President Ibrahim Soli reaffirmed Maldives' India First policy, with both countries reassuring each other that they continue to remain mindful of others' security concerns. He noted how India has always been a reliable ally of the Maldives through thick and thin. So this is, a mutually shared, assessment on both sides about importance of working together among India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. An important aspect of this engagement has been the readiness of India to be the first responder and step in with support as per the requirements of Sri Lanka and the Maldives without any expectation of quid pro quo. India's economic assistance to Sri Lanka, which you're aware of, totaling nearly $4 billion since beginning this year. Emergency supplies by India of food, fuel, medicine, and other essential commodities as part of its neighborhood first policy only illustrates kind of first responder role that India is willing to play in respect of our neighbors, Sri Lanka and the Maldives in particular. Likewise, India has offered support to the Maldives at critical moments. India's prompt assistance during the 1988 coup attempt, emergency help by India during the 2004 tsunami, which was referred to by both Vijay and Sanjay, and support by India at the time of the water crisis in Malé in 2014, established the advantages of India's proximity and capacity of India to come to Maldives assistance more than any other country. It's partly a factor of geography and partly a function of kind of close relationship that we have between us, and also the fact that Sanjay brought out that there is absolutely no history of tension or antagonism between India and island nations of the Indian Ocean region. In this context, I believe that given this backdrop of close and friendly relations among India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives, there is an understanding among them of common security challenges they face. This is reflected in close defense and security cooperation. I recall from my years as High Commissioner in Sri Lanka as to how our Sri Lankan friends looked at India as a preferred partner in terms of defense training, for instance, and in terms of training slots provided in our military training establishments. Sri Lanka has always been one country which gets the largest number of slots. Likewise, India provides nearly 70% of defense training requirements of the Maldivian National Defense Force. Bilateral and trilateral cooperation involving India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives has developed steadily in areas like maritime domain awareness that Dr. Baru referred to, capacity building through training, installation of surveillance radars, and provisions of defense hardware, and initiatives like Colombo Security Conclave. Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh referred to initiatives like IRA and IONS, where along with other partner countries, India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives are working together. Though these are still, work in progress, but I believe they provide useful building blocks for developing overarching architecture for cooperation in the Indian Ocean region, which is still lacking. It's still not there in place. Our third point I would like to make is again, has been referred to by Dr. Sanjay Baru, which is return of great power rivalry to Indian Ocean region. This kind of contestation was relatively muted in the IOR, unlike the Western Pacific, where we've seen escalation of great power rivalry in recent years. In India, we believe that those who live in the IOR have the primary responsibility for peace, stability, and prosperity in the Indian Ocean region. At the same time, we recognize that other nations have significant stakes and presence in the Indian Ocean, and it's perhaps inevitable that as the strategic significance of the Indian Ocean increases, so would the presence of extra-regional powers and the maritime competition in the IOR. The challenge will be to put in place pragmatic mechanisms for cooperation and ensure that competition does not degenerate into adversarial confrontation and search for zero-sum outcomes. A primary challenge that we face today is China's growing presence in the IOR. It is increasingly clear that Xi Jinping's China dream of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation involves China's emergence as the preeminent power, first in Asia and eventually globally. As part of its great power ambitions, China is pursuing a two-ocean strategy involving aggressive expansion of its naval and maritime presence in both Pacific and Indian Oceans. We are also faced with an escalating strategic contestation, indeed confrontation, between China and the USA. This will obviously impact India, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives, as we can see from the Chinese presence at Hambantota and Colombo ports, its ambitious Colombo port project, as well as forays into the Maldives. The recent controversy surrounding the visit of the PLA Navy surveillance ship Yuan Wang 5 to Hambantota that Dr. Baru referred to, the reminder of the challenge we face and kind of challenge, escalating, growing challenge we are going to face in the future. In this context, while dealing with the growing, escalating great power contestation in the Indian Ocean region, we are fully mindful of the agency and choice Sri Lanka and the Maldives have in dealing with the evolving geopolitical situation. We appreciate that Sri Lanka and the Maldives, which are strategically located close to the key lanes of communications, have their own concerns and aspirations and will play a key role in shaping new security architecture in the Indian Ocean region. It's very critical to understand their thinking in this regard, and I believe one of the main objectives of holding this web-based seminar is to engage in a candid and friendly conversation with the 5 island nations and how we can together work to advance the agenda of managing both cooperation and competition in the IOR. At the same time, while we understand the concerns of friends in Sri Lanka and the Maldives, the fact remains that China is today the primary strategic challenge for India and many other countries. That India-China relations are passing through a rough phase, and that the prognosis for the future is not particularly rosy at this point of time. We also recognize that security interests of India, Sri Lanka, and all the Maldives are closely interlinked, and that the leaders of our 3 countries, as I mentioned earlier, are committed to respect each other's interests and concerns within the framework of rather unique relationships we share. So this requires, a kind of dialogue where we understand each other's interests, each other's red lines, each other's aspirations and concerns, so that we can address them in a manner which promotes our relationship. Against this backdrop, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to navigate and manage common security challenges. Indeed, let me hasten to add that these challenges go well beyond China, and we should not fall in the trap of looking at them exclusively and primarily through the prism of concerns about China. Having served in Sri Lanka, I know how extensive and multifaceted our bonds and linkages are. One last point I would like to make is a suggestion that Sri Lanka and the Maldives can do much more to leverage their strategic location, proximity to India, and India's role as a growth engine for the region as the 5th largest economy in the world, which expects to maintain the trajectory of one of the fastest growing economies of the world. As Minister of External Affairs, Dr. S. Jaishankar has stated repeatedly, India is prepared to be both generous and non-reciprocal as part of its neighborhood first policy. What is required now is shedding some of our hesitations of the past and forging closer linkages and synergies between our economies. This will also include various aspects of blue economy that Dr. Bahadur referred to, and where both Sri Lanka and the Maldives are particularly well endowed. Such an approach will be more sustainable than depending on loans for unviable projects, which have partly contributed to Sri Lanka's present predicament. As far as Sri Lanka's current economic crisis is concerned, India is committed to provide all possible assistance, both on its own and working with the IMF, the World Bank, and other bilateral partners. Let me stop here and invite Mr. Sangha Abhay author and senior fellow of the Millennium Project, Washington, D.C., to make his remarks. Asanga, you have 15 minutes. Over to you. I think you're muted.
You hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador Kanta. It was a pleasure listening to you and to be part of the panel that you're chairing. So let me quickly share my presentation. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank ICWA for the invitation, and I'd like to sort of recall our past, where in 2011 we signed an MOU on the, a very valuable one for research between the Lakshman Kadrigama Institute and ICWA. One of the first MOUs we signed with a think tank in India, so it was with ICWA. And a lot of work should be done in this regard. So I'd like to sort of remember this moment as executive director back then, so the MOU we signed. So today's topic is basically I'll talk about China, the elephant in the room. So straight away I'm going into the topic where China in Sri Lanka's crisis and geopolitical and security perspective. I will basically cover the what's happening in the Sri Lankan political economic crisis, which is you have to understand what's the background, why Sri Lanka is in a crisis like this, and what is the impact of the crisis to the Indian Ocean, and the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific security dynamics, where Ambassador Kant just spoke about those 3 points where competition, the third point where the competition has moved into rivalry. China factor in Sri Lanka's crisis will be discussed, and lessons from Sri Lanka. So the geopolitics and geoeconomics, of course, is the most important area, the geoeconomics, because of Sri Lanka's strategic location, where Sri Lanka is located as a geostrategic location in the east-west sea lines of communication. The inadequate investment and commitment to strategic thinking is one of the first areas that I see, concern that I see from a Sri Lankan perspective. So the inadequate investment from Sri Lanka and again from Sri Lankan to the commitment of strategic thinking is something that's sort of missing. And I think our keynote speaker Sanjay Baru mentioned about Hanika. So of course the strategic thinking is not there. I mean, back then also there was a question about whether the strategic thinking, there's a missing side to it. The internal economic calculus and the impact on security of the Indian Ocean is another concern which I will be highlighting on my presentation. Sri Lankan foreign policy, because of its passive posture due to China's interference, is a danger in the regional security, which I want to clearly highlight. The economic crisis in Sri Lanka basically had two dimensions. So the liquidity issue as well as the insolvency crisis. The liquidity issue, where basically we didn't have the foreign reserves. You can see from month to month, and the CDC reduction and how it reduced. And you can see from this graph where the sovereign debt default and is exposed to external shocks. So early warnings were ignored by the Sri Lankan regime, as well as basically, we saw due to multiple factors why those warnings were ignored. And you can see former President Rajapaksa asked China to restructure the debt repayment, which is still we are having a serious concern because of the China's basically position on debt restructuring. So the large amount of borrowings from China, it's equal to the Japanese. Most scholars argue that it's about 10%. No, it's more than 10%. I argue that it's about 20%. So taking another scholar's view from Umesh Moramudali, so he says about 20%. It's not 10%. So you can see from 2019 to 2022, where the tourism income, drastic drop of the tourism income, the credit scores were sort of, you can see the downgrading of the credit scores. And the reforms that was introduced by the Rajapaksas, the tax cuts, as well as the external factors from the Easter Sunday terror attack in 2019, as well as the pandemic and the Ukraine factor also did have an impact. But when you look at the ultra-nationalist inward policy prescription, which the Rajapaksa regime continued, was on import subsidization, the heavy militarization with 28 military appointments in the civil service, and also the democratic backsliding and rejection of the early warnings, which I mentioned was the concerns that triggered the crisis. These are the 28 military appointments. You could see that first time in the Sri Lankan history that we had military, so much of military in the government civil service, as well as going into various institutions, including the archaeology department. So many, and it is more than Pakistan actually. So when you do a comparison, so we have more military presence during the Rajapaksa regime. The crisis was ruptured because of the autocratic rule, the rampant corruption, and also the poverty, which was, I mean, clearly, you can reference from the United Nations report, where it's more than 40% now, the poverty ratio in Sri Lanka, which is a serious issue. And what you have right now, just to give a quick snapshot, the more than 3,353 has been arrested using the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which is a dangerous, a trajectory that I see, that all these, young people who are getting arrested under the Terrorism Act, is going to be a serious threat to the society, as well as, labeling them, the people who entered and, basically to the president's house, identifying them as terrorists. There is warnings from the United States as well as many other countries that the current trajectory is not the sort of the most conducive sort of way to handle this situation. The crisis has impacted the Indian Ocean in basically two dimensions. One is the economic dimension, the geoeconomics basically on trade. So we have fewer trades from the crisis, fewer containers coming in, and it has impacted Sri Lanka's trade. The security, from the security domain, we moved from a fragile state and to basically a crisis state with limited cuts on the security spending. So less patrolling of the EEZ, counterterrorism measures, less investment, human trafficking, maritime pollution. So all of these sectors have been impacted because of the crisis. The direct impact on India's immediate security and Indian Ocean is also to be looked at, and that's really important. If you look at the China factor in the Sri Lankan crisis, China is not the only factor to trigger the crisis, but China is a considerable factor, according to the analysis that I have done. The autocratic model which Gotabaya Rajapaksa introduced with a heavy push factor, had a heavy push factor from China to alter the democratic model. The heavy militarization, the human rights issues, all that was supported by China. The CPC and the SLPP, which is the Rajapaksa political party, the model, basically, I've seen a continuous support between the two political parties, so basically coming in from China. And the foreign policy tilt, I call it a bandwagoning foreign policy tilt that Gotabaya Rajapaksa introduced during his time. The think tank level support is also very important, where China supports an enormous amount of money going in from China to private think tanks, Confucius centers, as well as private think tanks in Sri Lanka is also a concern. Like I mentioned, Chinese loans are not 10%, it's 20%. I'm quoting again Umesh Muramudali, so who has basically clearly identified that it is not 10 because of its opaqueness, because the Chinese loans are clearly has a sort of opaqueness and a transparency issue, so that Sri Lanka is having a serious issue. The interest rates, if you look at it, are beyond 6%, and it is not comparable to the Japanese loans at all. So, and most of the loans have more than 6% interest rate. Environmental EIA clearance has been completely ignored, like in projects such as in Mattala Airport, and which I have done sort of field research in most of these projects. The EIA clearances, the environmental impact clearance was not taken in. The heavy corruption was a visible factor in Chinese projects, and the civil-military nexus, which is a serious issue that Sri Lankan, I would say, the government has not calculated, unfortunately. The debt trap diplomacy from the studies that I've done, I see a strategic trap more than a depth trap because of three factors. First, basically on the Chinese, if you look at it, the military presence, the military model that they're trying to exercise, which is serious. The second, on the human rights support that the China is giving Sri Lanka, and if you look at it, the factor that even if you look at Hambantota and all these projects, it is more than 99 years. Although they said in the documents it's 99 years. I quote a foreign minister of Sri Lanka, and where he says that it is more than 99 years. So there is less transparency, opaqueness in these loans, which impacts the security of Sri Lanka as well as the regional security, has to be clearly understood. The debunking theories that are there, I've closely looked at it. It does not capture the Sri Lankan, I would say, the perspective coming in from Sri Lanka. Although this debunking theory says that, that there is no debt trap, but I clearly identify there is a debt trap in Sri Lanka. The relationship built by internal relationships on the political dimension, one cannot ignore that, and that is a serious factor for basically calculating the Sri Lankan foreign policy. The CCP interference coming in, so that has to be calculated. You can see from this slide that basically how China made those inroads. When it comes to the ports of Sri Lanka, I see the agreements that are signed, very loosely signed. This is from former Minister Dinesh Gunawardena. He's absolutely correct. There's only a few people who have seen these documents in the government circle. It is not available to the wide general public. So the people who have seen these documents are clearly identified that it is beyond 99 years, loosely signed. It has a civil-military dimension in it. And as a former Director General of the National Security Think Tank, I can clearly mention that looking at these, examining these agreements, there is a dimension that cannot be ignored. If you look at the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific security dynamics, I move into the great power rivalry. Basically, Sri Lanka is sandwiched between the BRI and the Indo-Pacific. This is from my the recent book, Conundrum of an Island. I see the two strategies that an island is trying to balance the two. China's belligerence in the Indo-Pacific is very clear. The power plant project was a very clear example last year. So the Chinese power, the wind power project, which they were trying to sort of establish in the closer to the Indian shores, became a concern for New Delhi as well as Colombo. So all this, when I was interviewing a government bureaucrat, basically a very senior bureaucrat was very angry over India for not allowing the Chinese project to move forward and not seeing the security dimension. So this is the environment which was created by Gotabaya Rajapaksa, which was very dangerous at that time. The US-China as well as the India-China, you could see from the Chinese embassy in Colombo how even the US exit from Afghanistan, how it was projected in Colombo. And also the many other India-China sort of rivalry, how it's projected from the Colombo. And the recent sort of very, I would say, the aggressive comments that came in from the Colombo Chinese embassy directly, on the ship issue, which I will come to that particular slide. I would say, challenging concern.
Sangha will have to wrap up quickly.
Yes. Okay. So I think my paper basically will analyze on the beyond the Indian Ocean, identifying a nation like Solomon Islands, also how China is present in Solomon Islands, and sort of a comparative study that bringing in the wider Indo-Pacific, Solomon Island and Sri Lanka. So that's an area that I want to highlight. And on the ship visit, I think it's very important to understand the this is from Harsh Pant. I agree with his observation. It is a serious threat for Sri Lanka as well as India, and if we not, I think the both countries would need to sort of look at the the neighborhood first policy as well as Sagar in a very close manner and sort of identify this sort of threat. And the security calculus has been sort of completely ignored by Colombo. You could see the region. I have sort of seen all the Chinese loans, and the support that was given to Chinese policies, which is already, I mean, most of the countries are sort of aligned with the Chinese. You can see the capture and the capturability of the elites, especially the political elites, is a concern. The Quad and the I have reference to Quad and the IPEF also on my paper, where the India-Pacific Economic Framework is an important initiative that can be introduced to countries like Sri Lanka on basically to create a resilient and a fair economy and a clean economy. So that's really important initiative. This is my last slide. So on the Quad, it's very important that this is from basically Thami Madhavan and Dhruva Jaishankar, clearly absolutely correct on their observation that how a nation like Sri Lanka can play a role in these initiatives. And we see a very sort of a passive posture. We don't see much an active role in Sri Lanka, and country-specific commitments to sort of Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, Quad, are really important. So that we have some sort of the foreign policy needs to be immediately recalibrated in Colombo to a balanced posture from the bandwagoning posture. So that's basically, and here are a few recommendations that I have. Basically, the country-specific commitment to free and open Indo-Pacific is really important. And also the Sri Lanka requires immediate recalibration, investment in existing minilaterals, such as in Maldives, Sri Lanka, and India is important. And a toolkit for the BRI, the Belt and Road. This is a point that I want to sort of clearly mention, that Asia Society has developed for the last several months. I was involved in this project where they developed a toolkit for the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, where Chinese can also sort of, introduce this to their projects to have more sort of transparency, more dialogue with the general public as well as the stakeholders. So there's a toolkit now available online, so you can see from the ASPI website. Yeah. So, and finally, the internal recalibration is really important on the foreign policy, as well as the protecting the values of democracy, as well as the other areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Asanga, for that presentation, for bringing out in a candid but evidence-based manner the nature of Chinese presence and activities, as well as their objectives in Sri Lanka, and the need for a recalibration on part of Sri Lanka. Thanks for that presentation. We'll now move to our next speaker, Mr. Thawla Rasheed. He's a former Maldivian diplomat. He's currently with Australian National University. So I'll request Mr. Rasheed to speak for about 15 minutes. Over to you.
Ambassador, let me just quickly put up my slides. Can I check if you can see the slides?
We can see the slides.
Right, thank you. So I would like to first thank the organizers for this opportunity, and also during my introduction, I would like to reflect my presence here in Australia, in Canberra, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I am appearing. My focus today is to highlight Maldives-India relations in the geopolitical and security context of the Indian Ocean region, but to explain this through the lens of climate security and development cooperation in the Maldives. So before I begin, just to highlight some of the topics: rising challenges, need for climate security, challenges for the economy and the policy approaches, main problems in international advocacy, national action and development, geopolitical competition, current policy trends, development, and strategic cooperation with India. So recent years has seen rising geopolitical tension concerning Maldives regional partners. As one of the smallest South Asian countries, the Maldives has maintained close relations with its closest neighbors, particularly India. However, with changing political scenes, regional cooperation has changed dramatically, especially in the last political terms. My focus today is to highlight the main policy developments and the development cooperation through the lens of climate change in order to explain the drivers of foreign policy mainly. This, I hope, can better explain how development cooperation has changed over the years, mostly and recently. So Maldives is small with a population of just about 500,000 people and is resource dependent for economic and infrastructure development. Maldives is constantly threatened by climate manifestations such as sea level rise. This threatens the land and infrastructure that supports economic and social activity. This means the government has to take drastic and long-term measures to achieve climate security. The following points, for the sake of saving time, I will highlight this in point forms. We'll explain how climate security incorporated into the development agenda has shaped the geopolitics concerning the Maldives. The first point, Maldives has a potential for development. A major tourism industry since 1970s and 80s has supported this progress. Maldives has the tourism industry that depends on the infrastructure of low-lying island formations. This naturally puts its economy at risk of high costs associated with managing infrastructure. So in this context, the idea of building reclaimed islands and land has become a very attractive development model, both for the industry and local communities. Second point is about the risk of inundation, which challenges the potential for development. One of the long-standing effects of climate change is the loss of water, freshwater supplies and coral reefs. People in local communities have experienced this for decades now. The other major concern is the potential loss of land. The islands are just about 2.4 meters above sea level, and most are less than this. For example, the global scientific predictions of its 0.5 meters by year 2100 puts the country at risk of inundation. Third point, the Maldives has the need to protect the land from sea level rise for survival of the economy. With international cooperation supporting government's efforts, government started to focus on projects to move smallest populations to larger islands or safe island centers. But this is not very attractive also for the local people because it conflicts with the identities and cultures attached to their land. For example, some development studies also show that climate has no direct links to reasons for people moving from urban or economically active populations. The main reasons are rather linked to their need for better economic life. Point 4. Movement of people to Male, capital city, and Hulumale. Can I explain what happens next? Movement to Male is historical and has started in pre-climate policy era. Movement to Hulumale is more prominent to explain the link between government policy, people movement, and climate security. Government's main policy focus is on the development of the economy. And apart from supporting a tourism industry, achieving economies of scale is important, especially to support sustainable economic activities. For example, the cramping up of people in the capital city has been a key concern and obstacle to long-term sustainability of the economy. This has been a key concern for policymakers for over decades now. Therefore, Hulumale development project centered around providing pathways for socio-economic progress and activities of people across the Maldives. This brings to the next point, that is development cooperation and regional security issues. So while projects like Hulumale Development Project have attracted foreign investors to support development in the Maldives, interaction with extra-regional actors has also created some tension among regional security partners. This includes an increase of geopolitical competition between traditional and non-traditional regional aid partners. Here, on this point, I would also like to highlight the importance of realizing the close connection between what small states do in terms of climate security and development and their implications for regional security dynamics, especially when extra-regional actors are involved in development cooperation. For example, the Hulumale Development Project, including the bridge connecting capital city Male, Hulumale, and the airport island, was supported by China's investments during 2013 and 2018. This was a time previous government preferred China's investments over other regional aid partners. While concerns were raised among Indo-Pacific partners in the Indian Ocean, the new government that came to power in 2018 and 19 reiterated the India First policy and put its approach to foreign partnerships on track with traditional norms and rules-based systems. So to highlight some of the current trends, Maldives foreign policy is based on national sovereignty, territorial integrity, respect for rules and rights-based systems, and most crucially, friendly ties with regional partners. India has been the closest and most important development partner, not only today, but for a long time, even since the times of post-independence developments. On the other hand, India has an important interest in the maintenance of regional peace and security, as well as to support development of the region. In this context, the India First policy has brought India closer to the Maldives in recent times, and I think this is important for promoting rules-based diplomacy and mutual interests of both governments. Maldives also heavily depends on external support for food and infrastructure security. India has a bigger role in this. While infrastructure is key to sustainability of the Maldives, and the support from India's projects, for example, the Greater Male Connectivity Project, is going to make big difference in the medium and long term for socio-economic activities and progress. Then again, as a large ocean state, the Maldives is both protected by ocean and challenged by climate-induced changes to the ocean. Therefore, the ocean becomes a major source of resource, supporting the blue economy and security of the Maldives. While climate change is the greatest catalyst to exacerbate existing multiple challenges, The ocean continues to bring security risks to the nation as well. With a major resource base, including fish and other marine support systems, illegal activities conducted by external maritime intrusions can cause both security risks and economic losses. I think this is one space where India has and continues to support the Maldives, particularly in navigating those non-traditional security challenges pertaining to ocean-based or maritime risks. While the Maldives has an effective Coast Guard service, improved technology, infrastructure, and guidance, navigation, and information systems can also further support respective agencies to address maritime challenges, which are crucial to support security activities, including achieving climate security in the Maldives through regional cooperation. So to conclude, as much as it has advocated for international cooperation for climate action, the Maldives has also achieved some level of progress at policy and local levels as steps towards protecting its land and people from the effects of climate change. In this process, the Maldives has also prioritized regional security interests by working closely with India on geopolitical and geostrategic issues. Thank you for listening. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Rasheed, for that presentation, for bringing out importance of climate security as a key component of the Maldives developmental agenda, and also for underlining the initiative, the policy of India First, and what it means in terms of Maldives external engagement, particularly with India. I'll now move to our third speaker. I'll invite Dr. N. Manoharan, Director, Center for East Asian Studies, an Associate Professor with Christ University, Bangalore. Dr. Manoharan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. At the outset, I must thank ICWA for putting this wonderful and timely theme for discussion, especially Director General JS, Director Research, Dr. Samita and Dr. Sankalp. What I do is I just keep it simple, around 12 minutes, 4 points. First is the context. The context in terms of the emergence of the Indian Ocean. There are 6 trends that we need to take note of, especially in the context of emergence of Indian Ocean, to discuss or debate about. First is in terms of changing American strategic posture is what we need to take into account. This has actually changed. Alfred Tayar Mahan is being revisited, and US withdrawal that is happening, or that has happened from South Asia, and so much of that pivot and other things that American strategic posture, there is a change in this particular one. This is one trend. Second is the rise of China as power at the global level, not just at the regional level or sub-regional level, at the global level. This also has actually impacted the Indian Ocean. Then the third trend is all about the involvement of several mid-level players in the Indian Ocean. Perhaps it could be India, Australia, Japan, and so on and so forth. This also has been an evolving or emerging trend. Then the fifth trend is the rise of regionalism in the Indian Ocean region. We all know there's so much of regional organizations that is coming, which I'll talk about it a little bit later. Then the sixth trend is about certain plurilateral arrangements. This was touched by Chair Ambassador Ashok Kanta and Mr. Dr. Sanjay Baru also, and DG also touched this in terms of emergence of plurilateral organizations like Quad or AUKUS and so on. So with this context of 6 trends, let me reflect on India's approach to the southern neighborhood, especially India and Maldives, especially in the geopolitical and security context. But before that, I want to touch on 6 major concerns of India in the southern neighborhood. First is the strategic concern. Earlier, we inherited what is known as strategic unity, but I'm glad to know that we are now talking in terms of organic unity. So this is something interesting that is happening. So this is the first concern that India has in terms of strategic. Second is in terms of, this is also comes in the pronouncements of the leadership of late: free, open, inclusive, peaceful, prosperous Indo-Pacific or Indo-Ocean region. This is also the India's concern. If something that is upsetting, then India is concerned about it. Then third concern is about the non-traditional security threats. We all know plethora of threats are there in terms of piracy or violent radicalization, terrorism, militancy, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and so on. This is the third concern of India. Then fourth concern is in terms of the well-being and welfare of Indian diaspora community in the, not just in Indian southern neighborhood, but the entire littoral states or beyond. This is another concern. Then the fifth concern in terms of the economic crisis that is hitting especially southern neighborhood. We all know, Dr. Asanga was pointing about that. So even Maldives is not spared by the economic crisis, especially what is going on now, Ukraine crisis or pandemic. So if our neighborhood is in crisis, then especially southern neighborhood, then there is an issue. So economic crisis and stability of this is another concern. Then sixth concern is about certain ethnic issues, especially in the context of Sri Lanka, is also a concern for India, and of course, certain issues in Maldives. So with these six concerns, what is that India has approached the southern neighborhood, especially India and Maldives, in dealing with all these issues? First is about the, just to put it in context, where India has, I think Ambassador Ashok Kanta mentioned about this, in terms of India has a natural geographical advantage. There it's not a bad pang, but is a good pang of proximity that India has. India has always been quick to respond and reach out to its neighborhood, whatever it be, either that be coup attempts or disaster relief or in terms of any human need, that India always has reached out. This is something we need to appreciate, the way India is dealing with the neighborhood. Second is in about how Maldives and Sri Lanka's their approach of India first, and that complements with India's neighborhood first policy. So there is always complement in terms of foreign policy aspects, in terms of India versus southern neighborhood. And then this was already mentioned by previous speakers in terms of India's vision of Saga. So we all know full form of it. This has been going on now nearly a decade, where the stated policy is that India is ready to help build economic capabilities and improve maritime security for our friends. Friends here means our neighbors and partners in the region. This is what the statement of the vision statement of, or the mission statement of the Saga is all about. So with this generic overview, India has been approaching at three broad levels. First is at the bilateral level, plurilateral level, and multi-level. This is India has been approaching or dealing with the southern neighborhood. First is at the bilateral level. We all know in terms of the various exercises that's been going on. I'm just touching only the geopolitics and security. I'm not getting into any other thing. So we know we have those three exercises with Maldives, and now Sri Lanka also has been added to this, and we have this exercise with Sri Lanka from 2011. And we also, this was also touched by Ambassador Ashok Kanta in terms of maritime domain awareness. This also we have been doing with, and aid and assistance, not just in economic terms, but in general terms, aid and assistance, and capacity building in terms of, I'm talking about when it comes to security aspects, capacity building is massively going on, especially to Maldives and Sri Lanka. And we also have at bilateral level, annual dialogues at defense secretary level, at various summit level, ministerial levels, and secretary levels. This is how bilaterally in terms of mechanism we have been doing with. Then in terms of plurilateral level, we all know this is new thing that has come up, especially when it comes to Quad. So NSA level, we all know all three countries combined. This issue also has come how we should actually focus on the three countries, India, Maldives, and Sri Lanka. NSA level, security level talks have been going on. And 2020, 2 years back, we set up this secretariat, trilateral secretariat at NSA level on maritime security also. This is what going on at the plurilateral level. Then we have at multilateral level involving these two countries and other countries also. We have IRA, we have IONS, we have BIMSTEC, and of course, SARC is there or not there. You need not to worry much about it. But there are at multilateral level, organization level, this is going on at the third level. Then what is the way forward? There are things I wanted to suggest. First, this was touched by earlier speakers in terms of India's name in the Indian Ocean. This is something if that creates some kind of jitters, it is not there. We have made it very clear. This is first thing that if at all there is, we keep reiterating that there is no threat or whatever. Then second is somewhere I think we need to distinguish between extra-regional players' involvement in terms of good intentional extra-regional players' involvement and not so good intentional, something that we need to actually distinguish somewhere, and then only we need to approach, especially their involvement in Sri Lanka and Maldives. And the third suggestion is in terms of the defense ties cannot be, or security ties with this southern neighborhood cannot be looked at in a segmented manner. Of course, we are not looking at, but the research shows maybe in general that the defense ties, the improvement in defense ties is directly proportional with the improvement in the other arena also. So somewhere we need to keep this in mind, and we cannot actually look defense ties in a segmented manner. And it's very important that the fact that our neighborhood, most of them are democracies, it's important that we need to reach out to the people. Otherwise, we may not be able to look at the security ties or whatever. Otherwise, we have seen this is the history of whatever. When regimes come, there is upset in the policies, or there is always imbalance or instability in the policy making, not in Indian side, but from the neighborhood. This somewhere I think we need to keep note of. We need to also reach out to the people. And fifth, perhaps, point is about we also should encourage in the policy making the civil society networks or think tank networks, whatever, in terms of the knowledge gaps or knowledge sources, how we can make it better policy making. Somewhere I think we need to work on all these things. Then I think our approach would be better and better. So I'll stop here in the interest of time. Anything we can always take on. Thank you.
Thank you, Manu, for bringing out various concerns with regard to Sri Lanka and Maldives and going beyond these two countries, for highlighting certain aspects of our policy vis-a-vis the two countries, and most importantly, the road ahead, what needs to be done. That was a very, very useful presentation. Now we move to our the last speaker for this session, Vice Admiral MP Muralidharan, who, as you know, is former Director General of Indian Coast Guard. Over to you, Admiral Muralidharan.
Thank you, Ambassador Kanta. Let me first share my presentation. I hope the screen can be seen.
Yes, it can be seen, yeah.
At the outset, let me thank ICWA and the Director General, Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, for giving me an opportunity to among such eminent speakers and scholars in this webinar. But I must also admit that being the last speaker in the panel is equally challenging after virtually all the pertinent issues have been discussed and brought out by the experts. But over the next 15 minutes or so, I will focus on the maritime security issues. Now, for a mariner, nothing has been more exhilarating than to see the world shifting focus towards the maritime arena towards the end of the last century. Situated as we are on the Indian Ocean region, the words of Admiral Mahan, the US naval thinker and historian, come flashing by, who said that whoever controls the Indian Ocean dominates this ocean. As the key to the 7 seas, and in the 21st century, destiny of the world will be decided on its waters. Now, the only concept that has changed is that towards the end of the 20th century, it became apparent that we cannot look at Indian Ocean in isolation, and the emergence of a multipolar world at the end of Cold War, the globalization of trade and commerce, the growth of Asian economies, which in turn call for their energy and mineral resources from Arabian Gulf and Africa, and transportation of these products to other parts of Asia, Africa, and Europe resulted in increased shipping between both the oceans. Now, this aspect of the Indo-Pacific was actually very succinctly put across by our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as quoted earlier at the Shangri-La Dialogue. And he further went on to say that India's own engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, from the shores of Africa to that of Americas, will be inclusive. We want to promote a democratic and rule-based international order, work with others to keep our seas and space always free and open, our nations secure from terrorism, cyberspace free from disruption and conflict. Now, when you look at the geostrategic significance of the seas, it would be evident that nearly 70% of the earth is covered by sea. 2/3 of its population lives within 100 miles of the coast. 150 of the 192 member states of the United Nations are coastal states. 80% of the cities and nearly all major trade and financial centers are along the coast. Now, if you go further, development of newer technologies, while it has brought a lot of communication and transportation, but shipping still remains the cheapest form of transportation of large volume of cargo. And the global maritime trade, which is about 80% of the world trade by volume and 70% by value. And if you go further, there are about 54,000 ships operating, which is estimated about $450 billion, and they generate 14 million jobs. And the total trade across the oceans, if you take the imports and exports, is about $35,000 billion. Now, apart from transportation, oceans are also major source for food, metals, minerals, and energy resources. And as we see that the natural resources on land are depleting, cheaper technologies are coming up, which allows us for extraction of resources from the deep sea. Now, if you come to Indian Ocean region, it's about 33% of the world population, accounts for nearly 50% of the maritime trade, and 50% of the container traffic, and 70% of the global trade in oil and gas. Now, the Persian Gulf accounts for nearly 60% of the world's oil resources and 26% of the natural gas resources. Now, you can see that virtually the oil arteries of the world are transiting through this area. And whatever happens here impacts all the major nations of the world. And you can see this is the sea lanes of communication that go across. The denser ones are shown a little deeper. So virtually every nation in the world is somehow affected by happenings in the Indian Ocean region. Now, even if you look at the expanded Indo-Pacific, something similar is true, which accounts for about 60% of the world's GDP, 65% of population, and about 60% of the maritime trade. Now, as far as India is concerned, about 90% of our trade by volume and 70% by value is through the oceans. And it'll be very evident that we cannot, maritime domain being so interconnected, we can't look at sections in isolations. But I'll focus on Indian Ocean region. The geostrategic value of the region has been brought out by the previous speakers. In fact, the region has operated forward deployed. Most of the major powers have forward deployed their forces, including nuclear capable units. And you'll find naval forces from the US, UK, France, China, and many others with lesser frequency are operating in this area. While examining various facets from the security angle, what emerges is the rise of China, which has been mentioned by the previous speakers, and how it is going into the Indian Ocean region. While it came in initially under the disguise of safeguarding our own economic interests and, of course, assisting in the anti-piracy patrols, PLA Navy has been regular in the Indian Ocean region for over 2 decades now. And the so-called string of pearl strategy of bases, diplomatic ties from Africa to Middle East to South Asia are all part of our strategy to establish herself as a major power in the Indian Ocean region, and is certainly a potent threat in the years ahead. Now, One thing what China has been doing is what we've been calling as the salami slicing, gradually bringing in small changes and making incremental gains, which by itself is not observed to be initially. But when you taken as a whole, it can bring about major strategic change in the long run. Now, in the maritime arena, China has been using it very effectively in the island territories close to her own shores and is slowly trying to expand. The PLA Navy is today rising. It's probably the largest in numbers. There are about 350 units, which includes aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, frigates, submarines, including nuclear ones, amphibious ships. And the PLA is modernizing and upgrading to become multi-mission capable force and is looking forward to emerge as a preeminent power in the world, definitely in the Indo-Pacific region, to challenge the US and the other powers. And I need hardly tell this audience of the flashpoint that we have in Taiwan, which is emerging today. And if it happens, there would be a spillover across the entire Indo-Pacific. Having looked at the strategic perspective, maritime security will agree as a very prominent role. Now, challenges to maritime security could be the economic well-being, that's energy, trade and commerce, social stability in the maritime arena, political peace, the maritime sovereignty, and environment, that's the health of the people. And it is quite clear by the end of 20th century that we are looking beyond the conventional naval confrontation. So today we have the non-conventional security challenges mentioned: terrorism, drug trafficking, arms trafficking, piracy, human trafficking, and illegal fishing, which affects most coastal states, and of course, economic and environmental threats. Now, let me come to a bit about the importance of islands or island nations. Strategically, islands have always played an important role in providing early warning and as surveillance posts and logistic bases for operations deep into the oceans. Today, they also provide countries with baselines to measure jurisdictional waters. And after the UN Conventional Laws of the Seas, governments today can establish exclusive economic zones up to 200 nautical miles from their baseline, making it a very important body of water for exploitation of maritime resources, as well as for providing defense in-depth strategy, whether you look at it from the continental point of view or from power projection from the sea. Now, therefore, this has become a very important focus area. And in passing, let me say that this is one of the reasons why there is so much of clamor for the islands in the isolated island, the Pacific Ocean, which many powers are trying to get in. So when you see the strategic location of India, Sri Lanka and Maldives, as you can see, you'll see that Sri Lanka and Maldives play a very significant role as Maldives stretches virtually south of equator, so all that it can play. Now, Sri Lanka is India's closest neighbor, and relationship between both our countries have been more than 2,500 years old. And we have built up, while there have been differences, but there's been a constant built up on the intellectual, cultural, religious, and linguistic interaction. There's also growing contact between trade and commerce. Now, we enjoy a very healthy and growing defense relationship. It's built on extensive training and service-to-service linkages. The commonality of both countries, including respect safety and security at sea lanes of communications, further calls for enhancing security cooperation. During the visit of the Indian External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, to attend the BIMSTEC, a lot of defense-related pacts were signed to expand maritime security, a setup of a joint maritime rescue coordination center, and which will strengthen the Sri Lanka's capacities for search and rescue, a floating dock and a ship repair dock for the Sri Lankan Navy, Dornier surveillance aircraft already been mentioned, and of course, liaison team from Sri Lanka in the Fusion Center. Now, all this will strengthen our cooperation. Now, India and Maldives also have a very strong bilateral relationship underpinned by geographical proximity. And during the recent visit of the President of Maldives to India, our Prime Minister Modi underlined that Maldives occupies a special place in the hearts of Indians and in India's neighborhood first policy. President Soli himself reaffirmed India first policy. And both the leaders have agreed to strengthen and deepen this partnership. Now, since 1988, defense and security has been a major area of cooperation between India and Maldives. The comprehensive action plan was made in 2016. We have a defense and security partnership is time tested in cooperation, transnational crimes, to disaster relief, and to provide, which will provide stability in the entire region. We also recognize both security of India and Maldives are interlinked. A major understanding is therefore each other's concerns we are looking at, and India provides a number of training opportunities for Maldivian defense forces, meeting around 70% of their defense training requirement. We have been jointly participating military to military activities such as exclusive economic zone patrols, anti-narcotics operations, search and rescue, humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief. There's also talk of the construction of Coast Guard harbor in Maldives. So the interaction close and continues. Now, this is actually very nicely summed up by our Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he said, and I quote, "The threat of transnational crimes, terrorism, and drug trafficking in the ocean is serious, and therefore close contact and coordination between India and Maldives in the first line of defense and security are vital for peace and stability of the entire region. We have increased our cooperation against all these common challenges. It also includes capacity building and training support for Maldivian security officials," unquote. Now, something that ties the three of our nations together is the Colombo Security Conclave, which is basically a trilateral security framework started in 2011 between India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. Basically, the pillars of security cooperation covering marine safety and security, human trafficking, counterterrorism, and cyber security. Now, in the fifth meeting in Bali, the membership expansion took place with an additional pillar of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, which is at the initiative of Maldives. All the three nations also conducted a 2-day maritime operation in the Indian Ocean region, looking at including securing the trade and trade lanes. And the recent conclave held at Kochi saw delegations from Bangladesh and Seychelles also participating. It discussed the implementation of enhancing security in the entire Indian Ocean region through a cooperation of the pillars of maritime safety, security, counterterrorism, combating trafficking, transnational organized crimes, cyber security, and of course, protection of critical infrastructure. Now, coming back to the strategic outlook in the region, the challenges continue to emerge for the security architecture, which in turn calls for opportunities for strengthening cooperation between nations. And one area for cooperation is enhancing maritime domain awareness, which, as you know, has been defined by the IMO as effective understanding of anything associated with maritime domain that could impact security, safety, economy, or environment. Now, this is something that you'll appreciate is needed on a continuous basis, and with monitoring taking place from the land, from adjoining coast, under the sea, air, and space. Now, all three, India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives, have significant exclusive economic zones, and therefore the surveillance capacity, which for individual state may be limited, by combining, we will be able to keep the entire area and surveillance. And closer cooperation would ensure that we are able to detect threats in advance and develop a tactical picture, and then the policymakers could take a decision and initiate action as necessary. All these include patrolling by ships, aircraft, unmanned aircraft, and even space-based surveillance. Now, geography has blessed all three nations to have a maritime domain awareness, very effective one. And the Information Fusion Center, set up at Gurugram in 2018, is a major step in collaborating with the countries in the region and multinational agencies. Today, we have 21 partner countries, many of them having liaison officers at the center, which can improve all this. Now, again, as a mariner, I'm very happy that the maritime forces, the navies and coast guards, have always played a significant role in enhancing connect between maritime nations. Now, port visits by ships at regular intervals, institutionalized bilateral, multilateral exercises, coordinated patrols, anti-piracy operations, and assistance search and rescue, and humanitarian and disaster relief, staff talks. These are all things that increase cooperation between nations. And I have had some personal experience having operated jointly exclusively with the Sri Lankan Navy and Coast Guard, as well as with the Maldives Coast Guard, and we also had trilateral exercises. Now, apart from what we have mentioned, platform like Sagar, the Indo-Pacific Ocean Series is a major step where we look at maritime security, ecology, maritime resources, capacity building, disaster risk management, science and technology, and trade and connectivity. Now, apart from this, we also had the Milan series of exercises, and early this year, as many as 40 countries participated, apart from the countries here. So this is something that which can bring in further cooperation. Let me sum up by saying that the Indian Ocean region has emerged as a theater of economic and strategic competition in the 21st century, as a maritime trade through it impacts the economies of all major nations. The strategic location enjoyed by India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives gives them an added stake in the security and stability of the waters of Indian Ocean region and beyond. Enhancing their trilateral cooperation would, through maritime domain awareness, etc., would strengthen the stability in the maritime environment in the region. I would expand it further to say that greater cooperation between Sri Lanka, India, Maldives, and Madagascar, and Mauritius and Seychelles will certainly enhance security interests across the entire region. Again, to quote our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, from his book on the India Way, and I quote, to promote better understanding of maritime issues, enhance security, strengthen capabilities, establish cooperative mechanisms, develop interoperability, and provide speedy responses. Now here, sorry. It is evident that cooperation between all the India and the island nations here would further increase our cooperation, and this is something that I would recommend that we go ahead. Aspects of coordinated patrolling, etc., is something that we all need to look through. And once we coordinate and work together, we would be able to enhance the security in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Muralidharan, for your insightful remarks. Now, as an experienced practitioner, Admiral Muralidharan has shared his thoughts with us on a very wide range of issues, including maritime and geopolitical challenges, presence of China, what it means, our engagement with Sri Lanka and Maldives, both bilaterally and trilaterally, as well as strategic outlook in the Indian Ocean region. Can you hear me? We can. Yeah, okay. No, so suddenly my screen has gone blank. Now we move to Q&A session. We have several questions in the chat box. 4 or 5 of these questions are addressed to Sangha. Sangha, can you look at the questions in the chat box? I'll just read out first 2 questions from Dr. Sanjeev Kumar of ICWA. First question is, to what extent Sri Lanka has been a victim of China's BRI? And second question refers to interview given by then Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, where he had mentioned, this was in June, that China has lost less interest in South Asia and has shifted its strategic focus from South Asia to Southeast Asia. How do you see these remarks? Can you?
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes. Yes, thank you so much for those questions, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar. I think they're very valuable insights that you have shared from the question. Basically, to what extent Sri Lanka has been a victim of your first question of China's BRI. It is a victim. It is a clear a victim. You can see from the economic crisis, my analysis clearly captures that, Sri Lanka is sort of trapped in a sort of a more strategic level trap. Although the economic dependency is there, where the debt restructuring, even the debt restructuring, so that we can't move forward without China. And then multiple projects that has not generated revenue, expected revenue has become a burden to the Sri Lankan economy. To the policy level, the strategic trap is being executed by China in a more sort of a belligerent manner in the post-pandemic, I see in post-pandemic with their wolf warrior style diplomacy. So the second question on the Gotabaya Rajapaksa's remark, so that's incorrect. I mean, I would say that there is no sort of a strategic shift from South Asia to Southeast Asia. What Gotabaya Rajapaksa wanted to depict was that there's less attention to this part of the region, while he was orchestrating something with the higher up. I mean, with President Xi's phone call. It was reported on the media also that he would like to even exercise a Chinese model of development into the rural areas of Sri Lanka and expect and reciprocally supporting human rights of Xinjiang, which we have never done in our foreign policy. So you could see that while he was shifting it towards Southeast Asia, I think there was also a strategic reason why he did that. But he had to face the consequence of his basically the bandwagoning foreign policy, which China was absent when the crisis triggered. For months, China was absent, not assisting Sri Lanka, and you could see the real the friend who was there during the crisis. Actually, the humanitarian crisis, where India was the first responder. Coming in with a close to $4 billion of funding, as well as support to the Sri Lankan people. So I think the second is a sort of a strategic political reason that he chose that, but there is no strategic shift to Southeast Asia, and South Asia is a priority for China.
Sangha, there are a couple of other questions in the chat box.
Yeah, can I go through it? And
yeah, one is about role of US in Sri Lanka, and
yes,
secondly, given deep inroads made by China in Sri Lanka, what kind of options the present leadership has to get out of the current?
Well, the US leadership in Sri Lanka has been very passive, I would say. They've been sort of articulating their position on human rights, mainly concerns on human rights, to be with the Indo-Pacific in a very sort of a passive manner. So I don't see an active role played by the US, but observing both sort of, the political situation and sort of, supporting Sri Lanka on the human rights. Nothing more than that. On China, I think the position on China has also been sort of rhetorically mentioning that Sri Lanka should have a more balanced foreign policy. So, but that's about it. So even the Indo-Pacific strategy has been very passive, I would say. Even the MCC, the U.S. relationship is clearly, you can understand from the Millennium Challenge Corporation, when the grants was sort of, we didn't accept. We rejected the Gotabaya Rajapaksa's government under the pretext of national security. The U.S. did not even didn't reply to that, which was completely incorrect. I mean, there was no national security threat from the Millennium Challenge, grant. So you can see a very passive posture. With the second question on the deep inroads made by China in all facets of politics and development, what options does the present leadership have? Well, the present leadership has, I think, an opportunity to balance immediately, to recalibrate the foreign policy. But unfortunately, what I saw was that, I mean, the recent incident of the ship, the spy ship that came in first. This has been the Sri Lankan policy, even on the submarines case in 2014. Initially, we didn't allow basically did not allow to dock in our ports, but then again after some time we changed the position. This is the danger of Sri Lanka's strategic thinking that I sort of highlight to basically to the foreign policy ones who are calculating the foreign policy. So one should not sort of have a sort of a commitment, a country-specific commitment on these areas, especially on the China's military. When the Chinese people was wearing military in our sites, the Chinese persons were, so as well as multiple. I see sort of inroads to the to Sri Lanka foreign policy coming in. So the Sri Lanka has to be extremely sensitive on these areas and have to sort of have some sort of collaborative approach with India and a strong position. Unfortunately, Colombo is unable to make that because of the strategic trap that I've clearly mentioned. So the new leadership has an opportunity, but then I see again with the ship visit that again moving towards basically following the same Rajapaksa foreign policy. Yeah, so I think I answered that.
Thanks.
Thank
We have sort of run out of time, but there are two more questions. If we can, can request panelists to respond to them very quickly. One is addressed to Admiral Muralidharan. Do you see prospects of possible cooperation under IPOI, 7 pillars to deal with non-conventional and non-traditional challenges?
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Kanta. Actually, yes. In fact, one of the pillar, the starting pillar of the IPOI is actually on maritime security. And today, as I mentioned, maritime security covers both conventional as well as non-conventional challenges. And cooperation, one advantage of IPOI is also that it is a non-treaty based, that is how it is. It's a non-treaty based, cooperative, collaborative approach. So nations can jointly do that. And I think I'll also link up the next part of the next question, which talks about the common security architecture. Definitely maritime domain awareness, link up with that, and the information fusion center that we have set up, linking up and contributing to maritime domain awareness is one way all the nations can contribute to the security architecture, because we can assess the threats that are coming in. And then collaboration between the maritime forces, the navies and coast guards through regular exercises, interaction, which will actually improve their interoperability. So we can just quickly get across who are the nearest. There are ways of establishing hotlines between the headquarters of the three services of between, say, Sri Lankan Navy, Indian Navy, Sri Lankan Coast Guard, Indian Coast Guard. We can go in. And I must also add that some months ago, where there was a major fire in a merchant ship, the Sri Lankan as well as the Indian Coast Guard and Naval Forces came to the rescue and helped in extinguishing the fire. So it is very much there. We need to develop, and it can be done. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more question by Athar Zafar. I'll request both Mr. Rasheed and Dr. Manoharan to respond. Question is whether three countries, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and India, can do more to develop a common security architecture, whether current mechanisms are adequate or more needs to be done to develop such architecture. Mr. Rasheed would like to take the first shot.
Thank you, Ambassador. So I think the question actually splits into different spaces when you look at foreign policy. So I'll focus on the foreign policy angle here. So when you look at security issues in the regional as well as maybe trilateral cooperation space, there are important functions for the foreign policy of each country here, and also diplomacy. So when you look at foreign policy, there are two key pillars where you had to focus both on the local or domestic factors as well as the interstate factors, or bilateral and multilateral factors. So these have to complement, and I think the framework we already have, the cooperation and looking at the neighborly relations, there is scope for improving the existing system and security architecture, and also reflecting on I think almost everyone here who has distinguished speakers have mentioned about the maritime policy and the maritime security strategy that we are embracing today will make a difference here, especially speaking from the Maldives perspective. I think maritime security and also its focus on blue economy aspect of security, both traditional and non-traditional issues at the local level and domestic level, will translate into our foreign policy interests to further cooperate, I think, with both the countries. So in short, I think there is scope for improvement, and the existing system is effective and I think efficient in a way to kind of allow that improvement to happen in present and future. Thank you.
Thank you. Manu?
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think it's an important question to nail on. In my observation, I made the typology of bilateral, plurilateral, multilateral mechanisms. So if we do a particular, put it in a matrix and see, most of the mechanisms are bilateral. So if we want to address a common threads, we need to have more plurilateral and multilateral. I'm not finding fault with the mechanism. It is good and it's evolving, but all we need to do is a good audit about the entire plurilateral and multilateral levels of mechanism, which to my understanding needs improvement or needs stepping up. This is what my observation is. We have very good bilateral mechanisms, no doubt about it. We need to strengthen them. At the same time, we need to work on the other two aspects of the architecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Mr.
Dr.
Kanta.
Manoharan. Yeah, we are concluding now. I know we have exceeded our time by 7 minutes, so I'll not try to sum up. Let me just conclude by thanking the four panelists for the excellent presentations and for sharing their insights on a very important subject. So thank you very much, and let me also thank ICWA for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Now we are moving on to the second and the final session of the seminar. The panel discussion will be chaired by Ambassador Anup Mudgal, former Indian High Commissioner to Mauritius. Over to you, sir.
Let me also join my other colleagues in thanking ICWA for organizing a very timely conference on a very important and evolving subject. I heard very carefully the earlier presentations by Vidya, Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, by Dr. Sanjay Baru, and then Ambassador Kanta. I think, the essence of what we are discussing today has already been covered by very, very well-crafted presentations by these colleagues, in fact. I, in fact, had the opportunity of working with Dr. Sanjay Baru as part of FICCI Task Force on Blue Economy, where we were working on the importance of ocean for people and the island states, and our focus was on island states and especially the small island states. Dr. Baru has already covered why Indian Ocean or the ocean space is important, economically, socially, culturally, ethnically, and then finally, from the viewpoint of security, safety, and the predictability of the ocean space. Everybody mentioned about Sagar, and I was fortunate to be India's High Commissioner in Mauritius. When the platform of Sagar or the concept of Sagar was launched by Prime Minister in 2015. And I was also part of the process of, in a way, developing this whole theme and pieces of Sagar. Sagar, in fact, is a tripod platform, because many people use the term Sagar platform. If it is a platform, then it rests on three important legs. As Dr. Baru mentioned, Sagar is definitely growth and economy centered. And it was deliberate. It was not an accident that the platform was projected as growth, economy, and I can use the term, say, prosperity centric for the entire ocean space, but more specifically for our partners in the Indian Ocean region. Now, what are those three pillars of Sagar? Economy, which includes all the blue economy sectors and trade and other things. Then it includes sustainability, because the help of the ocean while harnessing the ocean for economic benefits is absolutely essential and is becoming more important with the threat of global warming and other issues emerging. And then finally, the most important enabler for economy and sustainability is the security. Now, if this space is not secure, our economic engagement with the ocean will be disrupted, and our effort for maintaining the health of the ocean will also be interrupted. Therefore, this tripod approach to India's engagement with the ocean and its partnership with other countries in the region. Now, let me take Sagar to the island states and our partners as small island states, because in this section, we are going to be talking about Seychelles, Mauritius, and Madagascar, all three island states in the Western Indian, Southwestern Indian Ocean, and two of them qualify to be called as small developing island states, which is also called SIDS. And SIDS were the prime movers of bringing blue economy to the front of major sports. Now, in fact, when I used to sit in Mauritius, I used to try to understand the salience of ocean to the island states and specifically the small island states. And I, in fact, found that it's a very complex relationship, but the simplest way probably to see what ocean really means to the small island states. Let me see the relationship between their ocean space and their population, their ocean space and the size of the economy. We can also do this exercise for ocean space and the population. Now, if we look at, for example, the GDP per square kilometer of the ocean space which these small island states have to deal with, For instance, just as a matter of comparison, India, if you look at India's GDP, India's GDP is $1.1 million per square kilometer of India's EEZ. Now that's a substantial amount. But when I go to Madagascar, it is $13,000 per square kilometer of EEZ. Now let me look at Mauritius. When I go to Mauritius, it's about $6,000 per square kilometer of EEZ. And when I go to Seychelles, this amount goes down to $1,000 per square kilometer of EEZ. Now that is an indication of their capacity to deal with the EEZ they have. Now, of course, when we talk about any security or economic aspect, at the center of that is what? Are the human beings, in fact. Right? Either we do it for their benefit or we do it to protect them against adverse development. Now, when I look at the population per square kilometer of the EEZ, now India has 430 persons looking after 1 square kilometer of EEZ. What about Madagascar? They have 23 persons looking after 1 square kilometer of their EEZ. When it comes to Mauritius, it's just about half a person in Mauritius is responsible for 1 square kilometer of EEZ. And Seychelles, the figure will really shock everyone. It is 0.07 person per square kilometer of EEZ. Now look at this. This is an amazing statistic to demonstrate their ocean responsibility and their capacity to look after their EEZ. Now, these island states by nature are small. They are small in area mostly. They are very small in population. And they are geographically located at long distances from other partners. Given their size, because we use the term most of the time, we say, self-reliant, right? And when we translate that word, I will be starting this one. Right? Now, economies and populations of that size have difficulty becoming completely self-reliant. Now, if they have to look for avenues of growth, which is actually, again, essential for any population, avenues of growth for these island states essentially come from this ocean and partners beyond those oceans, and some partners who will join them in those oceans. So the oceans provide, or the global principles provide, a force multiplier for their economic growth. And on that depends their success. Now, one of the core issues under SAGAR, and was discussed by many members here, that primarily the responsibility of looking after our ocean space lies on the shoulders of the individual member states. But the question is, can all member states, small and big, look after their ocean space for the security as well as for harnessing of the ocean's economic value? Now, I gave you the data about the island states. Obviously, they have difficulty in finding resources to look after the ocean spaces because all the three pillars of SAGAR, which means the economy, let it be blue economy, sustainability and security, These are capital-intensive activities, as Mr. Baru mentioned. These are technology-intensive activities. And these are very, very resource-intensive aspects of your ocean space. Now, the issue is, if these small island states, by the nature of their size and location and other factors, if they do not have the resources, should they leave that space completely unattended? Or, since it's a shared space, we need to accept the shared responsibility for making sure that the small island states are supported both for the economic harvesting of the ocean and also for the security, safety of these spaces. And that is what India offers under Thawla. In fact, in terms of security, in fact, I was in Mauritius and I am aware of our cooperation with Seychelles and Madagascar. In terms of security, India's objective is to support these countries, first support these countries develop their own capacity for securing their ocean spaces. And what do we do for that? We go for capacity building by way of training, by way of supply of hardware wherever needed, and then capacity building and capacity enhancement. And in some areas, with the acceptance and cooperation of these countries, help them provide our assets for carrying out those security operations. Like, for example, the EEZ surveillance. The Indian Coast Guard and other institutions have constantly provided EEZ surveillance jointly with these member states for making sure that these areas are safe, secure, without much illegal activity. They have done a lot of hydrographic surveys for creating hydrographic maps for our partners. So there is this security relationship where India offers that support where these partners need that. And also in the safe example, the sustainability part. The sustainability part is also very, very resource intensive and technology intensive. Again, we are using capacity building and supply of hardware wherever possible for providing sustainable solutions to their requirements and problems. And the last leg, economy. What is India offering in terms of economy? Again, in fact, it has all the parameters. Capacity building by way of scholarship, by way of high-tech plots, by way of infrastructure development. Then what is called financing for development. India's program is called Development Partnership Program. It's a very extensive program which provides grants and lines of credit for these island partners for developing their infrastructure. And finally, in trade, for example, India offered what is called non-reciprocal market access to LDCs. Now, it's a very, 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 very comprehensive, multifaceted approach to SAGAR, which means security, sustainability, and economy. But now, the issue is it enough? Would there be competition? Would there be conflict? Would there be contestation? You know, my viewpoint on this is that that small island states would definitely depend on their globalization and their linkages with the outside world for their economic development, for their technology development, for their security and all that stuff, right? Because they, on their own, do not have the critical mass for handling these challenges. The question is, who would be available from the global space for partnering with these island states for a win-win solution? And that is where, in fact, India, as a resident Indian Ocean state, one of the major countries, comes forward and offers to plug the gaps where our partners feel that they need support. It is generally, as I say, it's generally driven by the priority of the partner state or the recipient state. India does not impose conditions with its both security and economic support. Now, of course, there are others. Many of the speakers spoke about China. Now, China, like India and the resident states of Indian Ocean region, China also has their own economic and geopolitical interests in the region, right? They have their energy sources passing through Indian Ocean, their other material inputs passing through Indian Ocean, their own products passing through Indian Ocean. Obviously, they also have an ambition, and it's a reasonable ambition, for making sure that the space remains friendly for them and the space does not cause disruption to their ambition of growth and development. Fine, it's an understandable thing. But the question is, can safeguarding your interest come at the expense of somebody else's interest? That is where we are kind of looking into this whole aspect of contestation and conflict, possibilities of contestation and conflict in the Indian Ocean. But as resident states, we must realize contest or conflict, the main problem or the main consequences will arrive for us, the residents, much more than anybody else. I know their maritime supply lines could be disrupted, but for us, everything would be disrupted. Therefore, the countries of the region, they have to come together, find the platforms for cooperation, for making sure that while they collaborate for progress, but at the same time, they do not allow possibilities of contest and conflicts arising in there. Now, I think that is where I would like to stop. In fact, we, the resident countries of the region, we have lived with this ocean for thousands of years. And when it comes to, many people said India has always been at the center of the global trade right from the ancient period. I do not want to bore you with that long story going back by 3,000 years. But the fact remains, the history has evidence that whenever the ocean space was peaceful and stable, all the countries in the region grew economically and it brought prosperity, peace, and happiness. Whenever the space was conflicted or contested, they all suffered and paid a price. Therefore, I think our call, India's call through Sagar is that the resident the resident states of Indian Ocean must come together in cooperation. And must come together in cooperation not only in the Indian Ocean, but also beyond, but the threshold or the underlying requirement being we must promote development and prosperity, but we must avoid conflict and contestation. With this, I will stop here, and I will in fact call upon the expert speakers in this panel. Let me see what they have to say on what I said. Right? Was my assessment right about their expectation and their needs and their opportunities and their challenges? Was my argument correct that no, India is a partner who can work with them for a win-win? Am I right that there is no option against peace and stability in the region? Peace is not a choice. Stability is not a choice. It has to be there, right? So I will, permit me, I'll invite Malshini Senaratne from Seychelles to comment on what I said and give her own opinion as to where we should be leading in terms of the Indian Ocean maritime affairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. I come to you from the smallest country to form part of Africa, and obviously it's the Republic of Seychelles. As mentioned by my esteemed moderator, we are a small island developing state, and we have a population that is quite shocking. It's about 100,000 people, give or take. And we are a country that holds more water than land to our name, specifically about 1.3 million square kilometers of ocean versus about 455 square kilometers of land. And with respect to our development agenda, we have started to rebrand ourselves, if you will, as a large ocean state, specifically looking at this ocean aspect within the blue economy model. Now, we've done quite well for ourselves in recent years. I would just like to lay out that groundwork. So in 2015, we achieved high income country status. We have comprehensive social services, including free health and education. So we do tend to rank very highly when it comes to the African continent on global human development indicators. However, as mentioned, we face considerable socioeconomic challenges. And this has been largely exacerbated as a result of the pandemic. For example, 25% of our population live below the poverty line. So how we choose to navigate the coming years through the blue economy framework will speak to both the economic, the social, as well as the sustainable development side of things that will impact our generations for years to come. Now, with respect to the blue economy model, we have been seen as somewhat of a pioneer in this space, largely because we have acknowledged our dependency on the ocean, as well as our vulnerability towards climate change. Through the blue economy model that we have proposed, we are trying to find options to mitigate some of those structural challenges that small island developing states face, such as very undiversified economies, heavy reliance, for example, on fisheries and tourism, an extremely small population, very limited skills and capacity building options, and very high unit costs when it comes to providing public services. Now, it makes sense for us to look at the blue economy model as a development agenda because it was valued at around $495 million in 2018, and it comprised of about 30.6% of GDP. And the blue economy also contributes about 45% to Seychelles' formal employment numbers. So with tourism and fisheries, both very climate impacted sectors, being the cornerstones of our economy, we deemed a healthy, sustainable ocean as imperative for our country's future. Now, how we've gone about, or rather what we've done in the past few years, is we've managed to sort of pioneer very innovative financial instruments as a means of financing this agenda. In 2015, we launched the world's first debt for nature swap. That was concluded where we, in agreement with the Paris Club, restructured around $21.6 million worth of our debt. We also launched the world's first sovereign blue bond. This was valued at around $15 million. It was raised with the help of private international investors, and the proceeds from these financial instruments are intended to fund the expansion of not just our marine protected areas, but also to fund projects that revolve around sustainable marine and fisheries development in the blue economy. And last but not least, in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, Seychelles declared 30% of its exclusive economic zone a marine protected area. And we exceeded the meeting of SDG 4.5 as a result, which states that by 2020, states should look to conserve at least 10% of their coastal and marine spaces. We are now in the process of understanding the MPA in terms of which zones that we will allow for development and which zones that are strictly no-take. This has made us largely a champion of the blue economy model in the Western Indian Ocean, but we continue to face numerous challenges. For example, we are very vulnerable due to our very isolated geographic location. We continue to rely very heavily on fisheries and tourism, even through the pandemic. We face multiple challenges that might seem non-traditional in nature, such as unregulated, illegal, unreported fishing. We also have overexploitation as a result of our marine spaces. And we have other things such as transnational crime, human and drug trafficking. All of these are major concerns in our waters as well. Tourism is very much a challenge. It is an overdeveloped sector, heavily relied upon by government and population alike for income and revenue, and it cratered during COVID-19 as well. Last but not least, within our blue economy agenda also has the hydrocarbon exploration and mining, which forms part of our framework. And this is quite tricky because oil exploration in Seychelles has also begun as the island nation has signed an agreement with a British oil company. So it requires a look at this blue economy framework because the principal focus, as the government has said, is the conservation and protection of the unique environment, does not preclude the government within the framework of the blue economy to engage in research and the exploitation of resources that may lie below our ocean floor. So Seychelles is now very heavily focused on rebuilding its economy following this pandemic by creating, rejuvenating, and also upscaling our outlined blue economy sectors. But I feel that this must not happen without losing sight of the environmental and the socio-economic principles that signpost its blue economy roadmap. There are multiple opportunities that come up with respect to this framework: aquaculture, renewable energy, even hydrocarbon space. But it will require delicate balancing acts. So as the moderator mentioned, between competition and collaboration, you will need to boost sectors up, such as agriculture, sustainable fisheries, ports and shipping, because it is all important to the country in terms of food security, infrastructure development, economic diversification as well. And this is where partnerships with partners of choice, if you will, around the world come into play. Partners such as India have collaborated with the Seychelles on numerous blue economy fronts, including maritime security, coastal surveys, research, and capacity development. And such partnerships are going to be very essential for Seychelles as we move forward. So unless we have a very clear vision of blue economy and a clear vision of how we want these partnerships to proceed, we might run the risk of failing to appreciate these opportunities in terms of provision of equity and conservation, and we might opt for business as usual. Nonetheless, the future remains very bright, and the future remains for Seychelles very, very blue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Malshini. In fact, I totally agree with you. You know, Seychelles, when we were working on the task force on blue economy as part of FICCI and then also as part of the PM's Economic Advisory Council, Seychelles is seen as a role model in blue economy. The kind of initiatives you have adopted in blue economy, I think they will play a lead role for others to follow. As you rightly mentioned, and I mentioned, whether you talk about tourism, or you talk about fisheries, or you talk about trade, or you talk about illegal activity in the waters, all these issues are eventually dependent on the enabling environment in the waters. That is where, in fact, safety and security of the ocean space becomes important. Security is the greatest enabler for sustainability and for economic development. So I hope you agree with me on this. So now we have the next speaker, Dr. Priya Bahadur from Mauritius. Priya, are you there? Can you please check if Priya Bahadur is there?
She's there. I
Hello
think she
everyone,
needs
my
to unmute.
apologies
Yeah,
for this.
now she's unmuting now. She's just
Yes.
unmuted.
Priya, please.
Yes.
unmute
Hello
yourself.
everyone. So I'm Priya Bahadur from the University of Mauritius. First of all, my thanks to the organizers for inviting me to share my opinions on the topic on which I will be talking about, that is Mauritius, the perspective of Mauritius concerning the Indian Ocean. I will share my presentation. Sorry. So I just try to share my presentation. So my apologies for this. So I actually cannot share my presentation, so I will proceed without the presentation. So first of all,
Please click your share button below.
yes,
Then you
yes.
can. Then you can. And on top, you'll find a share button.
Yep. Okay, I just cannot. So first of all, a presentation of the context of the study. Mauritius, so it is found in the southwest of the Indian Ocean. So the island of Mauritius is actually found within the Tropic of Capricorn, 20 degrees south of the equator and 57 degrees east of Greenwich. So according to the constitution of Mauritius, the Republic of Mauritius actually includes islands of Rodrigues, Agaliga, Saint-Brandon, Tromelin Island and the Chagos Archipelago. The exclusive economic zone of the Republic of Mauritius covers around 2.3 million kilometers of the Indian Ocean. To be able to understand the perspective of Mauritius concerning the Indian Ocean, it would be actually good at this point to have a recap concerning the history of the island, which was first discovered by the Dutch. So these were the first ones to colonize the island of Mauritius, found in the southwest of the Indian Ocean during the course of the 17th century, according to written records. So after 2 unsuccessful attempts, the Dutch actually left the island of Mauritius, which will then be colonized by France, which will proceed to name it Ile-de-France from 1721 up to 1810. So as from 1810, Britain will proceed to take control of the island, which will actually play quite a strategic role in the plans that Britain had for India. Leap forward now to the era of independence of Mauritius. Actually, Mauritius will achieve its independence in 1968. The new government of Mauritius will be much preoccupied with the internal situation of the island. It actually had to cater for the numerous economic as well as social challenges which were hovering over the newly independent country. We had communal riots among different groups on the island, so the new government also had to develop strategies to transform Mauritius from a monocrop economy to one relying on export processing zone and tourism, the tourism industry. Now, immediately after its independence, Mauritius was, like I mentioned, quite preoccupied with the internal situation, with the domestic situation of the country. It nonetheless managed to establish diplomatic links with numerous countries. So in the post-independence era, Mauritius has had a traditional policy of friendship with different countries, including India, different Western countries, as well as China. So Mauritius
Mauritius shares historical ties as well as cultural ties with different European countries, like I mentioned, India and China. A majority of the ancestors of the current Hindu population living in Mauritius actually came from India. There have been around 450,000 Indian indentured laborers who came to work in Mauritius during the various phases during the course of the 19th and early 20th century. So while some of these Indian indentured laborers returned back to their countries, some of them decided to stay back on the island itself. Throughout the after the independence of Mauritius, actually, the island continued to maintain close links with different countries, which have been instrumental in the colonization process of the island. Now, Mauritius has come to play an important role in the Cold War era in the Indian Ocean. The accession of the Chagos Archipelago before the independence of Mauritius is unfortunately one of the consequences of the Cold War politics in the Indian Ocean region. Newly independent Mauritius had no real policies concerning the Indian Ocean. Despite forming part of the non-aligned movement, Mauritius did accept ships from both superpowers in its ports, partly because, like I mentioned, it had no real policy concerning maritime security during the Cold War era. Throughout the years during the Cold War period and even after the end of the Cold War, there was the development of bilateral relations between Mauritius and numerous countries, including India. There have been the signature of defense agreements between India and Mauritius starting as from 1974. Actually, India came to replace the United Kingdom as the main security guarantor of Mauritius as from the 1980s. India provided different types of aids, including training, equipments, and officers to, for example, the Mauritian Coast Guard, and even to the helicopter squadron. It has been claimed that Mauritius came to develop an Indian Ocean strategy only during the 1980s, starting with claims of sovereignty over the Chagos Archipelago as well as Tromlin, which will come much later. So claims over sovereignty over the Chagos Archipelago and Tromlin would seem to indicate that Mauritius had come to develop actually a strategy for its maritime territory and perhaps for the Indian Ocean as well. Throughout the years, Mauritius will try to use diplomatic ties for several decades to try to resolve the numerous territorial conflicts with the different actors like France and the United Kingdom. So membership in the different regional organizations like the Indian Ocean Commission, the African Union, and the Indian Ocean Rim Association will come to influence the policies of Mauritius concerning the Indian Ocean. The actions of the Republic of Mauritius in collaboration with other Indian Oceanic states and powers to tackle the non-traditional security threats like piracy and IUU fishing do highlight, however, a plan of actions. However, at this point, it would be good to highlight how the actions of Mauritius concerning the Indian Ocean seem to be a response to the actions of other powers for the region rather than something emanating from the government itself. So this can be highlighted by the financing of the different projects by different regional organizations and different actors. Recently, we have had the Wakasho oil spill that is in July 2020. So actually this incident, this environmental disaster came to highlight some of the weaknesses in terms of emergency situation response. So the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan was activated by the government of Mauritius, but it was not sufficient to tackle the oil spill. The Minister of Blue Economy, Marine Resources, Fisheries and Shipping, Sudhir Modu, I quote, "So this is the first time that we are faced with a catastrophe of this kind and we are insufficiently equipped to handle this problem," end of quote. Mauritius then proceeded to request international help once it realized the limitations of its national contingency plan and its resources. There were several countries which came forth to offer their help to tackle and to try to limit the Wakashu oil spill after the incident. So what actually does this particular incident highlight? Does Mauritius has sufficient means in terms of be it expertise, resources to not only tackle future problems that we might encounter, not only be concerning not only in our own EEZ, but this actually also limits Mauritius in its plans for the Indian Ocean in general. So what about now Mauritius, the Indian Ocean, and the 21st century? The Indian Ocean actually came to witness different major geopolitical changes with, for example, China's policy of strategic power projection, the USA's strategic refocus on China as its major security concern, the projection of the Sino-Indian conflict in the Indian Ocean. Mauritius will come to play a role in India's saga, which has been mentioned by several speakers before me, security and growth for all in the region. As from 2015, there have been mentions of agreements between Mauritius and India for the construction of a jetty and the extension of the airstrip in Agalega for civilian purposes. Mauritius has been receiving many technical and military assistance by numerous actors, including India. So actually, the nature of the infrastructural developments in Agalega are at the center of many debates in Mauritius as well as outside Mauritius. One of the solutions to try to alleviate the different types of rumors would be to make public the memorandum of understanding between, for example, India and Mauritius concerning the construction of infrastructures in Agalega. This might help to dissipate fears concerning sovereignty of the island of Agalega. So Mauritius, since its independence, has been friends with both India and China and wants to be considered as a friend of both nations. There are actually no permanent friendship in diplomacy, but permanent interest. To what extent is it true for Mauritius? Throughout the years after it achieved its independence, Mauritius came to cultivate a policy of friendship and cooperation with regional as well as extra-regional powers. Unfortunately, for the time being, despite playing a strategic role in the plans that different powers have for the Indian Ocean, Mauritius does not actually has several limitations concerning its plan for the Indian Ocean in general. So, I would like to conclude with some suggestions, perhaps for Mauritius. The way forward would be, for example, to develop a long-term strategy concerning the security of its own EEZ, first of all, and then perhaps to come up with a consistent strategy for the Indian Ocean in general. Mauritius should perhaps be investing in the technical training. In the future, like several speakers before me have mentioned, small island nations of the Indian Ocean will be called or are already playing an important role in the Indian Ocean region. These small island nations, however, lack required resources and technical expertise for doing that. They should perhaps increase collaboration with competent regional or extra-regional powers to ensure, for example, the safety of sea lanes of the Indian Ocean. We have regional organizations like the African Union, which should perhaps come up with more plans to try to implement, for example, the 2050 Africa's integrated maritime strategy. So all the powers in question, be they India, China, or the European Union, or several other European powers adopt a non-intervention policy as far as the internal affairs of Mauritius is concerned. However, perhaps the different contracts allocated to some of these actors mentioned might provide them with a strategic foothold and a strong influence in the countries of the Indian Ocean. So I will end here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Priya. In fact, I was witness to what you were telling when I was there. I saw for myself how Mauritius progressed from a monoculture economy to a very modern information technology driven economy and became a high middle income group country. And if I could tell you, because I was dealing with people on day-to-day basis, this whole collaboration between India and Mauritius was people-driven. Even, for example, you mentioned about this facility in Agalega. You won't believe. I had residents of that island coming to me and saying, please help connect this island, remote island, to the mainland. Because there was a problem. If somebody was sick or ill, there was no way you could help that person. If there was a turbulence in the water, there was no way you could land there. There was no way you could dock a boat there for supplies. So I think, I am strongly of this opinion that this relationship, or most other relationships, finally must be driven by people, in fact. And that is what is at the core of India-Mauritius relationship. And I'm very confident that we will keep working together for our mutual interest, for a win-win situation in our waters. Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite Dr. Jovens Ramasi from Madagascar. Ms. Ramasi, you have 15 minutes to please articulate your presentation. Are you there, Mr. Ramasi?
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. So thank you to ICWA. So I will share my presentation. So thank you for giving me the floor. As I said before, so I'm from Madagascar, from the University of Thawla. So it's on the east coast of Madagascar. So I'm going to speak about the case of Madagascar. So mainly I'm talking about the diplomacy, the FIAVAN, and the place of Madagascar in the strategic competition in the Indian Ocean. So there will be three main points I will talk about. It's about the Malagasy diplomacy in the Indian Ocean. And then the second point, I will talk about the strategic competition so between the great powers rivalries. And then the role of India, the relationship, the partnership between India and Madagascar. So first of all, so this is what, as you see on the slide, this is the geography of the Indo-Pacific Islands. So we can see that Madagascar is located in the southwestern part of the Indian Ocean, which is a strategic location at the heart of power issues. So Madagascar has a population of nearly 30 million of inhabitants. The population is a youth population. Just over 60% are under the age of 25. And there is a high total fertility rate of more than 4 children per woman. That's ensured that the Malagasy population will continue its rapid growth trajectory for the foreseeable future. Talking about the economy of Madagascar is a market economy, and it's supported by an agricultural industry. More than 80% of the population are working in the agricultural industry. And there's also an emerging tourism, textile, and mining industry. So Madagascar agriculture produces tropical staple crops such as rice and cassava, as well as cash crops such as vanilla and coffee. So Madagascar is part of this southwestern of Indian Ocean. As it was been already said, that the Indian Ocean represents 36% of the global maritime economy and approximately 200 billion tons of oil transits to America and Europe via the Red Sea and the Mozambique Channel and the Cape of Good Hope. So the Mozambique Channel sees transiting 30% of the world oil production, 2/3 of the most strategic straits, and 55% of the world population are in the Indian Ocean. Madagascar has a geostrategic position with regards to the wealth of the seabed in terms of gas and oil projects. This concerns the Mozambique Channel, but also the islands that are located in this part of the Indian Ocean. It's the scattered islands, Bassa da India, João de Nova, and Europa. And there's also the abundance of fish projects. So the Indian Ocean plays a decisive role for international stability, in particular because of its maritime routes, which link together major poles of the world economy, Asia Pacific, the Middle East, and Europe. This leads Madagascar to conduct all-out diplomacy, so both bilaterally and multilaterally, so that the country is part of 4 of 7 regional organizations linked to the Indian Ocean, like the IOC, the Indian Ocean Commission, the SADC, the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, and the Indian Ocean Rim for Regional Cooperation. So on the figure, you can see that that's the wealth, the natural resources of Madagascar, which includes a lot of mining wealth. So you can see that Madagascar holds some gold, some oil, and some gas also. And you can see on this slide the mineral potential of Madagascar. And as I said before, the country has put on all-out diplomacy, so multi-sector diplomacy, which is mainly based on the principle of Fiavan. Fiavan is a Malagasy word that encompasses the Malagasy concept of kinship, friendship, goodwill between beings, both physical and spiritual. So the literal translation is quite difficult to capture, as the Malagasy culture applies the concept in a unique ways. Its origin is Avan, meaning kin. It could be understood in a general manner as solidarity or togetherness. We can compare the Fiavan to the concept of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, considering the world as one family. So the Fiavan advocates the preservation of union or unity with the aim of safeguarding peace in the sense of universal brotherhood. Fiavan is at the heart of the Malagasy foreign policy in accordance with the principle of the Indian Ocean Peace Zone. So we can see that one important principle is the principle of non-alignment. The Ukrainian-Russian conflict is an example of this. So in addition, the country implements an extradition diplomacy with regional and extra-regional partners. So Madagascar's relationship with these different powers must be understood with regard to the geopolitical and geoeconomic issue of the region. So the strategic position of Madagascar thus disrupt grid and competition. So Madagascar would want to benefit from several competing powers. So to try to balance relationship between regional and extra-regional partners. But the country will to take economic benefit from its partners. So in that goal, the country wants to have a multi-sector cooperation, also military, security, and cultural economic cooperation with different actors. So the second part of my presentation is I'm going to talk about the strategic competition. So there's a multipolar and complex competition between the new Asian power like China and India, of course, and the whole powers, France or the US in the Indian Ocean. So the will of these countries to have some control in the Indian Ocean. So the island states are today at the heart of the new geopolitical narrative, and there is a denser diplomatic network to want to go have stronger cooperation, like in the blue economy. So we can see that France is present in the Indian Ocean in Mayotte, but also in La Réunion, where the FASOI, so it's the armored force in the southern zone of the Indian Ocean, are located. So France has sovereignty over a dozen islands in that region. But there's also the US. The US have a military base in Diego Garcia, located in the Chagos Archipelago in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So it plays a major role in the region. It's like also China that has increasingly a strong presence in the region, in Comoros, in Maldives, in Sri Lanka, but also in Madagascar. So China wants Madagascar to play the role of like a state, a transit state within the framework of the Maritime Silk Road. But there's also a power like Russia. Russia has made a remarkable return comeback since the last presidential election in 2018. All these states, are, as well as Turkey or Japan, are interested in Madagascar's mining, gas, and oil wealth. As a result, cooperation agreements in the military field, in particular maritime security, are concluded. So we can see also on this map what are the different actors that were as involved in that region. So we can see that the France, India, China, and the US. And what are the relation between Madagascar and India? So India is increasingly positioning itself as an important political and military player in the region. It considered that region as its natural zone of influence, and in Madagascar, India is the second largest trading partner after China. India sees Madagascar as a vital pole of the Indian Ocean in terms of regional development. So regarding the interview of the ambassador of the India's ambassador in Madagascar in last June, and this within the framework of SAGAR, the Security and Growth for All in the region. So that include some military cooperation, humanitarian, health and cultural and education cooperation. Madagascar has also joined the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And the relationship of Madagascar with Madagascar also include also soft power, the Indian soft power, as there's some yoga and Hindi teaching in Madagascar. But we can see also that the Indian Council of Cultural Relations organized several events in Madagascar, and diaspora is playing a an important role that is manifested by the inauguration of a Center for Indian Diaspora, the Indian DO. So India wants to affirm South-South solidarity by helping Africa and therefore Madagascar in the quest for a development that will allow a global rebalancing. So we can see that there is several meetings like the India-African Forum Summit. And I've also said that India play a major role in the naval diplomacy. So we can see on the figure that India activities in the Indian Ocean. So India has expanded its naval presence in the Indian Ocean. And Maritime Security Cooperation, once centered on Mauritius and the Seychelles, now extend to coastal African states as Madagascar. As an example, the chief of the Malagasy Navy visited India in June 2018 and in November 2021. So he has been part of maritime symposia and conclaves. There were also the participation of a Malagasy officer in the 10th SAREX search and rescue exercise organized by the India Coast Guard last August in Chennai. And India also offers some trainings opportunity to Malagasy naval personnel under the ITEC network program. And there was also the visit of the Ministry of Defense in India to participate to the India-African Defense Ministers Conclave in 2020, the Defense Expo. And he has a meeting with the Indian Minister of Defense in Lucknow with a discussion focusing mainly on maritime security. And there were also some meeting with the Indian armed company SMPP PVR Ltd during the Euro Satori in 2022 in Paris. The naval diplomacy of India is part of the desire to appear as a security provider against threats of all kinds in order to achieve a peaceful Indian Oceanic neighborhood. So we can see that we are facing a strengthened strategic partnership between India and Madagascar. So indeed, Madagascar participated for the first time in April 2022 in the Rasina dialogues. So India supports Madagascar so that the country could play a more important role in the Indian Ocean in view of the importance of the Indo-Pacific. So the geopolitical importance of Madagascar is to play Madagascar needs to play a more important role in the region. So that's why there's more cooperation in defense and maritime security. And as it's been shown by this figure, the maritime influence of India in the region. So we can also see that there's a diverse and deep partnership between the two countries. And the partnership is going bigger since the few last years. So as a conclusion, so I can say that we can see that there is a competition for naval dominance in the Indian Ocean. So there's kind of changing balance of power. So between the new Asian powers and the old powers. So a new world order. So India is like we can see is like a Indian Ocean power and Asia Pacific power. But we need for the region to have a more cooperative and not competitive security in the ocean. That's in order to have to see the Indian Ocean as a peace zone and to promote peace and security and stability. But it's also important to improve governance and maritime safety and security, and also to develop a maritime capability for countries like Madagascar. And Madagascar needs to develop his foreign policy to be more focused on the sea, to have a better sea power, and to be a kind of naval state. And so it's important for the country to have a naval diplomacy and also an ocean policy, because, like it was said earlier in the seminar, like Alfred Mahan said in 1890, whoever controls the Indian Ocean will dominate Asia. So the destiny of the world will be decided on waters. This quote demonstrates the importance of naval power from the end of the 19th century, and this is all the more true today with the competition between the different powers and confirm the strategic centrality of the Indian Ocean. So Madagascar must show skillful diplomacy in order to assert its interest in the world in perpetual motion and to reinforce the naval nature of its policy. And Madagascar must put an end to the marine blindness in order to strengthen its maritime capacity in terms of security and safety in the Indian Ocean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramasinghe. You rightly mentioned there will be multiple players and partners for anyone in the region, but you have also given us a method of testing the spirit of partnership. That is Fiyavana, you mentioned, and in India we call it Vasudeva Kutumbakam. Whether a partner would succeed on this test, that will determine whether we'll have more cooperation or competition or conflict. I think we all wish that we have cooperation under the spirit of Fiyavana. Thank you so much. Now I will invite Professor Subramaniam Raju. So its floor is yours for next 15 minutes.
Yes, thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Respected chair, co-panelists, dignitaries, and ladies and gentlemen. Let me at the outset thank the Director General of ICWA, Ambassador Vijay Thakur, for inviting me to be part of this event. In the context of maritimization of the world, India needs to focus more on maritime, because we know very well about India has 2.1 million square kilometers of exclusive economic zone, and it has a large coastline, and it has 530,000 square kilometers of continental shelf and more than 1,000 islands. And India is seen as a security provider by most of the countries in the Indian Ocean, and India's credibility has been enhanced through maritime. So in other words, one can say that India's profile in the world enhanced through maritime dimension. I don't have hesitation to say that India failed to have a good relation with its neighbors through continental dimension, whereas on maritime dimension, I think India was seen as one of the responsible countries in the world. And it also demonstrated its role as R2P, and its trade more than 95%, which makes India needs to look at or rigorously towards maritime. And India has no maritime dispute except with Pakistan in Indian Ocean. And India was never seen by any country in Indian Ocean as a hegemonic or dominant, whereas on continental dimension, there is so much criticism on India. And I'll leave that apart when you look at India's role, as mentioned by Ambassador Vijay Thakur, role in IONS or IORA, or or in a crisis, particularly in 1994, when you're talking about tsunami, or we look at how India also respected the verdict given by ICWA regarding the maritime dispute with Bangladesh in 2014. I think that makes us to be more vocal to talk about rules-based order. I think this is somewhere we need to look at how India demonstrated on maritime domain to be as a responsible country. And then we know very well how India is actually involved in Indo-Pacific, particularly Quad. With this background, I look at how India's relation with the Western Indian Ocean, which is very, very important for India because not only strategically, economically, but also it has culturally, historically, has a long way to have relation with the Indian Ocean islands, particularly Madagascar, Mauritius, Seychelles, Reunion, Mayotte, etc., etc. And in other words, one can say that the Indian diaspora is very strong in this region, which makes us to have good relation with the western part of Indian Ocean. And this region is also known for poverty, and also there is so much maritime threats which emanate and these countries are unable to address those maritime threats, and they don't have capability or capacity to address or to govern their maritime domain. In that case, when you look at India has demonstrated in terms of helping them when they are in crisis. So in that sense, when you look at how India was very, very much presence in the Western Indian Ocean to protect the interests of the island states in this part. On the other hand, the region is strategically, economically very important to India. India depends on the region for its energy security. In other words, one can say that both entities realize the importance of each other, and this region is also seen India as a security provider. And India is also observer in IOC Indian Ocean Commission. India has a very good relation with France. In the in the recent past, one can see the strategic relation between India and France, which also will play a very significant role in the western part of Indian Ocean. India also has good relation with the United States or Japan, who are also having interest in this part of Indian Ocean. And we are also talking about Sagar, which is very, very important, which is a part of Indo-Pacific Sagar policy of India, where Sagar gives so much understanding about how India is looking at the relation with other countries through Sagar. I think when we look at about Sagar and Sagar and IOIS or Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative or Blue Economy all go together. And when you talk about that, I'll come back later. I think when you look at about India's concern over Chinese presence in the Indian region, that is also very, very important. But the foreign minister of China, who recently visited Sri Lanka, Maldives, and particularly Madagascar, where we have this initiative of Indian Ocean Council for the Development of Indian Ocean Islands. I think this is somewhere we need to look for, because how we have been having good relation with this western part of Indian Ocean, but then the way the Chinese is penetrating into the western part of Indian Ocean, which is also great concern for us. We need to be very careful, because we need to see how China is penetrating in this part, because we have to learn from Amatota experience, because we should not leave that, I think, as space for China to be very actively involved, and which makes more concern for us in the later stage. And this IPOI is also very, very important, as demonstrated, as initiated by Prime Minister about the 7 pillars, that maritime ecology, security, marine resources, capacity building, disaster risk reduction, science and technology, and trade and connectivity, which are also part of blue economy. as most of the speakers are talking about blue economy, I think this is very, very important because island states are talking about more about geoeconomics than geostrategic or geopolitics. I think this is somewhere the webinar is more concentrating on geoeconomics. I think this is the area where India can look for relation with this Western country, Western part of Indian Ocean, particularly when you look at, as previous speakers also talking about, the fisheries is one sector which can be seen very important because fish are a very critical source of protein, and also most of the people livelihood is depending on fish, and also when you look at fish is the one industry where most of the women are empowered and women are involved in this sector. And also we know about this illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, which is also a major concern for these island states as well as for a country like India. And there, I think poor fisheries management needs to be addressed. Otherwise, very difficult to look at about the employment for this region. And also tourism is another aspect of blue economy, which talks about not only generates revenue, but also protect and respect local cultures and traditions and heritage. And this is a very, very important aspect for any country's economic survival, particularly coastal states. And we have seen recently about one of these sectors which really made us country more vulnerable, that is Sri Lanka. And that trade is very, very important. Tourism is so important. And particularly the another sector which could be seen as important aspect in blue economy, that is the exploration of marine resources. I think that is something very important because we have seen during the COVID how we are fighting for the medicine to come out from this pandemic. I think the pharmaceutical sector is so important because health is becoming very, very important for human development. And that is something where we're talking about marine species provide cosmetic products and painkillers and even treatment for cancer, asthma, arthritis, so on so. And in 2011, there is one data which talks about, gives us demand for pharmaceutical from marine species was valued $4.8 billion, and it was anticipated to be triple in the near future. And of course, there is a problem when you're talking about extraction of metals from the seabed is still not economically viable, and also they can cause harm for local sea life. But then still we need to look at about how we can explore with the cooperation between the two entities. And we have seen that recently China also involved in a project rare earth deposits with Madagascar, where it is exploring. I think this is another aspect where we need to look at about these rich resources which are available in the western part of Indian Ocean, which is also a major concern for India, and both entities could really help each other to develop blue economy. And blue energy, which is also another aspect of blue economy. We're talking about the coastal states concerned about the rise of sea level and climate change, which are also going to have impact on their livelihood. I think that, and also there are hundreds of isolated communities which are scattered, and blue energy can really help to provide power to these isolated communities. And blue clusters, which is very, very important, because when we are talking about most of the sectors are working in isolation, if the blue clusters will help the different sectors of blue economy, which bring all these to reduce their cost and increase the revenue and have cooperation between the sectors. I think that is something where we need to look at about the role of cluster to promote, coordinate, and represent needs of the sectors. And marine spatial planning, it is another area which needs to be taken as a cooperation between India and the western part of Indian Ocean islands. That is something limited area, maximum benefits. I think that is something where we need to look at, that a single location can be designed for multiple purpose, and MSP is a tool to manage the use of seas and oceans coherent. And we need to look at about when we are talking about ocean wealth. I think ocean wealth cannot be expected unless we have healthy oceans. I think that is something very important. We need to look at, there should be there is a link between ocean wealth and ocean health, and that is something all these western part of the western islands and India could really help each other to talk about or to concentrate more on ocean governance, which is very, very important. So I conclude, when we are talking about that, India has demonstrated its role as a security provider, and also it is also more concerned for these Western Indian Ocean littoral states and India to look for ocean health and ocean wealth. And both these littoral states needs to look at about the peace and prosperity, stability, security in the region. And also developing blue economy is one aspect where they can look each other, and the littoral states are really, they look through the lens of development and prosperity, stability, security. I think that is something where we need to look at about how India could really have cooperation with these little states. And India is also equally, when you are talking about expecting $5 trillion economy in the region, in the future, I think India can't become an economic power unless it becomes maritime power. And there is a link between maritime power and blue economy. So I stop here. Thank you for the patience.
Thank you so much, Professor Raju. In fact, happy that you really concentrated on the importance of blue economy for the states in the region, especially the island states. Professor Raju, as you remember, in fact, we estimate the ocean assets at something about $24 trillion. And then the OECD says by 2030, value addition and job creation will be higher in ocean activity than the corresponding land activity. But you're absolutely right, this will not be possible without the ocean health and safety and security of ocean space. So I'm sure, you know, on these elements, the states of the region will come closer, will cooperate, because when it comes to security and health of the oceans would not respect boundaries or state boundaries. These are connected waters. So if we have to provide safety and health of the ocean, we have to all work together. I thank you very much for your presentation. And now I invite the last speaker of this panel, Commodore R.S. Vasan. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador Mudgal. It is a great pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Director General ICWA and the entire team for putting this together. In fact, you know, being the last speaker, I think most of the things that I may have to cover have already been covered, but I would like to underline some of the important aspects of these island nations. I think Ambassador Mudgal also laid a lot of emphasis on the exclusive economic zone, which is an important factor. Even in India, we're looking at something like 2.01 billion square kilometers. And out of that, a major portion of this has also been given to us by Andaman Nicobar. Therefore, the islands have their role in giving us that extended territory, which we need to look at for harnessing, not for exploitation, but for harnessing the oceans, which is, concomitant with the blue economy aspirations. You know, the point that has come out very clear. So, both Admiral Mahan was quoted, as well as Sardar Panikar by Dr. Sanjay Baru, and Admiral Muralidharan and others have also spoken about Admiral Mahan. Comes out clearly in the postulations of maritime power is geographic location, which is where we need to look at the location of these islands that we are discussing today. How are they become important? It's their physical location, whether it's Madagascar close to the African coast, or whether it is Seychelles, whether it is Mauritius, whether it's Maldives. Where are they located? What is it that they can do to complement our own growth trajectory? Or the security concerns, how do we address them? I think this is where their location has become extremely important. I'll definitely show some slides which will make it even more relevant to say how these islands, because of their proximity, because of also the fact that, something like 60,000 vessels every year pass through sea lines of communication, which are very close to these islands. And, as Admiral Mudgal, as Ambassador Mudgal brought out, they do not have the capacity to monitor the exclusive economic zone. If you're looking at 0.25 or 0.3%, looking after every square kilometer of EEZ, how do you monitor it? Which is where there is a need for them to look up to friendly nations like India, who can provide the kind of support that is so essential for expanding the scope of their surveillance and even for harnessing through the blue economy courses. So I think we are on the right track in terms of engaging with these smaller island nations where we can contribute. I was very happy to hear from Madagascar about the mention of Vasudhaiva Aiva Kutumbakam, which means world is one family. So no, this resonates well with our neighbors. We are not a predatory kind of a nation which would like to invest at their cost, which is come out here. And I was very happy to hear from our Sri Lankan friend, Mr. Dr. Ashaka, where he's clearly brought out as to how India has been a benefactor over here, and whereas China has been pursuing those predatory tactics and tech diplomacy. So we are not here for that. We would like to ensure in the true spirit of Sagar. When you're talking about security and growth for all in the region, we mean it. We mean every word, and we would like to do everything that can complement this objective of Sagar. So this is where I thought I'll make some preliminary comments based on the discussions today, and then go on to my structured presentation, which is there. More so because there are some excellent maps which tells us, and each picture is worth 1,000 words, as we say. So let me see whether I can share this. I hope I'll be able to succeed. Give me just a minute, please. I hope it's coming up.
Yeah, we got it.
This is what I wanted to show. And more importantly, because of the relative locations in the Indian Ocean region. And we know how important it will become. So these small islands, this is the opening statement that I made, is when you call it SITS or whatever you want to. These are important in the geopolitics of IOR and thereby gaining prominence in the Indian foreign policy priorities. So this is the map. Now Madagascar has been covered earlier. You can see, look at Comoros, which is over here, and you can see Seychelles, and you can see Mauritius and the Reunion. I'll also talk about this a little later. So these are the countries that we are looking at. I'm so happy to hear first-hand account from the resource persons from these countries. I don't think we had anything from Comoros unless I missed out. But these are these first-hand perspectives that are of great importance to India as it becomes somebody who joins hands with them to increase their own profile. Whether it's economic development, whether it's blue economy, whether it's education, whether it is technology. So this is where we can join hands and we can offer it to our neighbors who are here. So this is another slide which tells us, I was also happy to hear the mention about Chagos Islands, because this is where again I think India has a role to play in ensuring that this is returned to their original owners. Because we all know that there are efforts to convert this into some kind of a economical, environmental showpiece. But obviously that is to keep the indigenous population out of it. So I think India should join hands with Mauritius and other neighbors over here so that this is restored to the originals and the militarization of the Chagos Islands is stopped. So obviously when you look at the location of this, it's all very clear as to how important these are in the Indian Ocean region. Many terms have been used. As India is a net security provider, he's a first responder, he's a net security facilitator, net security, whatever you want to say. The point is that India is all this and much more. Because of the geographic location, because of a vibrant economy today, the fastest growing economy, and with a benevolent nature of its engagement with its neighbors, which makes it easy for us to transact with anyone in the Indian Ocean region. So after all, it is Indian Ocean. It does not mean we own it. We would like to ensure that in the Indian Ocean, whoever is here prospers along with us. That is the whole objective of Sagar and Blue Economy Initiative. So you can see here, where Indian Navy is definitely a regional superpower here in the Indian Ocean region. There is no other Navy which can compete with us. And you can see how we are carrying out the mission-based deployment now. We are simultaneously located in these important points so that it is not for any military ambitions as such. It is more to provide immediate help to the movements which are here, to the nations which are here, and which is where we need to be very clear that these are not aggressive military maneuvers, but more in terms of friendly, help that can be sought and given at short notice. No,
Yeah,
these
but
are, of
I think
course.
the slides are not moving.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, yeah, tell me.
It's moving here. I don't know. There must be some.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you please tell him. I'll tell him. I'll tell him.
Can you see this slide?
No, your slide is frozen, sir. The first slide only.
Oh,
please go to the slideshow mode and then come to this.
All right, let me just do that here.
Yeah, now it's there.
Now it is changed. You please go to slideshow mode.
All right. No, I think these are perhaps the slides that you missed out.
Yeah, you could show it as slideshow. Change
Yeah.
it down below. You change to.
Yeah, you can come to the current slide. You have muted yourself.
Yeah, can you see this?
Now, yeah, we can see it and we can
see, but it's in that slide sorter mode.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
go to the slide you are covering now.
All right. Okay, I think we'll leave it at that because I don't want to lose much time here. As long as you can see this, if it's not in the proper mode also, it will be, it may be kindly accepted because I do not want to lose out much time in trying to put this together. Okay, so as I was saying that this is the area which are the straits, obviously the choke points, which we also call them, are the areas of great importance to Indian Navy, and we have taken measures to see that these are monitored along with our friendly nations. And so this is, of course, a graph that tells us, where all we have various kinds of presence, whether it's China or whether it is India. And so different terms have been used. One is the string of pearls, the other is the necklace of diamonds. So different terms are used. Basically, both China and India are engaged in a kind of a power play. And the island nations which are here, again, would see power play in their backyard. And so it is where they need to be a little more careful in what is to be accepted. So these are some of the detailed description of what China is doing in some of these places, which was related to the map that I showed. And what more can be done in terms of these areas? Because they are of both strategic and political and economic importance to both India and China, and which is why you see the kind of engagements. But obviously, India likes to look at it as historical cultural relations spanning centuries, and therefore we would like to ensure that we are the first one to help them out with their aspirations. Now, this is the one which clearly tells us that we can see that even France, which has the largest exclusive economic zone,
Can't hear you, sir.
Yeah, we have lost you. Commodore Watson, can you hear us?
Can I make a point here? Hello?
We are waiting for Commodore Vasan to reconnect.
In the meanwhile, can I make a point here?
Ambassador Bodgil, somebody is asking your permission to make a point.
Yes, so but I want to disrupt Commodore's presentation.
Has Commodore Watson come back?
A very quick point, please make it.
No, I was so happy to hear Vasanji talking about education because I'm a co-founder of the Indian Ocean Comparative Education Society, and I was very interested that all these beautiful strategies that have been mentioned by the speakers in the morning and now, well, I think we should have an introductory handbook made for all the little nations dotted around the Indian Ocean, a common handbook, very elementary, with all the problems and issues delineated in that handbook. It would be wonderful for all the little nations to have one handbook with the common problems and strategies and policy from the government, which they are trying to think about, to put them together and help the Indian Ocean little nations whenever they are in dire need or help from India or whoever. If that could be possible, that would be wonderful.
Very good idea. I'm sure ICWA would have noted that request. And we'll see how we take it forward.
Thank you.
Are you there?
Can you hear me now? Hello?
We hear you now. Yes, we can hear you. Yes. Again, you are lost. Commodore Saab, your connection seems to be unstable.
Commodore Vasan, we just spoke to him and he is reconnecting.
Sorry, there is some issue in my house and there is an interruption in the current. So I'm sorry about it. 1 second, I'll reconnect.
No, we can hear you now, Commodore Saab. If you could please kind of go ahead with your oral presentation.
All right. I know essentially, what I'm trying to say is that the geographic location, which is there, the importance of this in the Indian Ocean compels us to steer a strategy that engages with these island nations.
Yes.
Particularly in the context of development as far as the economy is concerned, in terms of engagement, what are our security needs? With the maritime domain awareness, which was also mentioned earlier, is again of great importance. We allowed these coastal radar stations to be established, and it's not just for our use. It also helps them to monitor their exposure using limited manpower and augmented by our own presence, which has gone on for decades. As Ambassador Mudgal would have seen firsthand, both in Mauritius and places, we have made it a point to help them with their surveillance needs, material assistance, ships, all have really, enabled these smaller countries with limited access to technology manpower to ensure that an exclusive economic zone is not used for, non for pursuing non-traditional things, but for military purposes. So I'm very sorry that there are some glitches in my home on the power front. So, but by and large, I think this is what I wanted to convey, to say that we've done very well in terms of engaging with these neighbors. We must also look at the fact that France is a major player here. It is, everybody talks about China and other powers, but we also need to be conscious of the fact that France is also a very good player and they have excellent relations. So therefore, we need to work with them in terms of promoting the maritime security architecture in the Indian Ocean region. So great importance to all of us. Thank you for the opportunity, and I will definitely share my slides with the organizers so that what they could not see here maybe share participants. And thank you, Jai Hind.
Thank you so much. It was really a very useful presentation because seeing the location of these places makes everyone understand the whole issue much better. I think we have already taken our time allotted. So what do we do? There is a question. I think there's one question. And this question, let me see. This question is in fact addressed to Mr. Ramazdin. I just open the question. Can somebody please read the question from the chat box?
Okay, the question is, can you comment, for Dr. Raju, can you comment on the rules-based order in the Indian Ocean region, especially given the fact that the Indian Ocean region is extremely diverse and complicated? In this context, what role have the island states in the region can play?
Yeah,
From
thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Sripati, yeah.
Yeah. So this, related to rules-based order, it is not a new. It was there already on class 3, article 43 talks about freedom of navigation. But the whole problem is, when we are talking about rules-based order, whose rules-based order we are talking about it? If it is China, then how do we deal with China? How do we negotiate with China? This is a problem with us now. Now, in the context of Ukraine crisis or the Chinese movement in the Taiwan, how do we explain this rules-based order? Whether this is the time, whether it is relevant for us to talk about rules-based order, which was already there on class 3, where Article 43 talks about it. That is one. Number two, in the context of Indian Ocean region, when you're talking about all the countries are looking for rules-based order because most of them are invulnerable in case there is going to be a rivalry between the major powers. But then again, we see how, for instance, the recent Chinese ship in a Hambantota port, where we have seen how Sri Lanka has permitted the ship to be at Hambantota port. So some of these nation states or island states which are not in a position to say no, that is what we look at. Otherwise, island states are always uphold these rules-based order. This is my answer.
Any other question?
Yeah, there are two more questions. One question is, how does, I think this is a question to the third speaker from Madagascar. How does Madagascar view India-France strategic partnership in Southwest Indian Ocean? Given the maritime disputes between the island states and France, does it influence India's ties with the island states in any way?
Dr. Ramsey, can you answer this? Dr. Ram, is he still there? Or
yeah, can you repeat the question, please?
How does Madagascar view India-France strategic partnership in the Southwest Indian Ocean? Given the maritime disputes between the island states and France, does it influence India's ties with the island states in any way? Particularly your perspective on India-France strategic partnership in the Southern Indian Ocean.
I don't think it's influenced the policy of Madagascar with his partner. But the dispute with the France about the islands in the Mozambique Channel, Madagascar had the support of countries like China or Russia, but Madagascar tried to have to balance his politics with all his partners. So it's not really influencing his politics with India or other partners.
Okay. There's one more question to Dr. Priya Bahadur from Mauritius. You referred to African Union Integrated Maritime Strategy 2050, which essentially looks at maritime security from a multidimensional perspective with an integrated approach, which puts sustainable development of African blue economy and maritime safety at the core. How do you think India and Mauritius can work together in regional frameworks, particularly like SADC, given that Mauritius is an important member of SADC, and AU framework to implement the African Union Maritime Strategy?
My apologies. Can you please repeat the question? Due to, I think, connectivity issues, I have missed the first part of the question.
Okay. You refer to African Union Integrated Maritime Strategy 2050 in your presentation. So essentially the question is, how should India and Mauritius can work together in regional frameworks like SADC and African Union to put these integrated maritime strategy in place?
I believe it does not depend only upon the collaboration of India and Mauritius, but on all the members of the African Union to try to concretize the different plan of actions that have been decided by the African Union, not only by the African Union, but by the different regional organizations. We have the Indian Ocean Rim Association as well, which is involved in several regional projects involving the different small island states. So it does not really depend only on the collaboration between only Mauritius and India.
Yeah, I think I also agree with Priya on that. In fact, India has excellent relationship with most of the AU member states. I think we can work with them both on the bilateral and regional platforms for providing support wherever required for achieving the AU's own framework for maritime management. So I think with this, we come to an end. We have already run out of time. So again, I will not really hazard summarizing the presentations and conference because all the details would be available, I'm sure, on ICWA's website for anyone to see. I would now request Nivedita to please convey a vote of thanks to all the participants.
Thank you, Chair, for chairing this last session. Now we come to the very good afternoon. We now come to the end of this very productive and engaging web-based seminar, which in fact gave us a chance to indulge in interesting deliberations on a range of issues that affect the security dynamics of island states and India's interface in these countries in the region. So it's my pleasure now, at the end of this very successful seminar, to propose formal words of thanks. At the outset, I would like to thank DG ICWA, Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, for a very insightful opening remarks in the inaugural session and her guidance and directivity in organizing this seminar. I would like to place on record our sincere gratitude to Dr. Sanjay Baru, member governing body, ICWA, for delivering a very insightful and thought-provoking keynote address. I think both the opening remarks and the keynote address in the inaugural session actually set the context for the seminar. I would like to thank the distinguished chairs for the two sessions, Ambassador Ashok Kanta, former Indian High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, and Ambassador Anup Mudgal, former Indian High Commissioner to Mauritius, for sharing their very useful insights and observations on the theme and also steering the discussion. I'd like to express our sincere thanks to all the distinguished speakers from Sri Lanka, Maldives, Seychelles, Mauritius, and Madagascar, and India for their very thoughtful presentations and valuable recommendations that they have provided in each session. We hope to publish the papers and we look forward to their contributions. I would also like to thank our very distinguished invited participants who have joined us from various time zones for their valuable comments and observations and active participation. At ICWA, I would like to thank JS ICWA, Ms. Nutan Kapoor Mahawar, for her continuous support in organizing the seminar. I would like to express my thanks to the ICWA team, Dr. Samta Malampati and Dr. Sankalp Gujar, for their joint contribution and coordination of the seminar, and the IT and other staff members for ensuring a smooth running of the conference. I would like to express a heartfelt thanks to our research faculty and cooperation support and the rapporteurs for covering the sessions. With this, we come to an end of this very successful international seminar. Thank you all for once again for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.